The chill of October pierced through Clara Ellison's threadbare cloak as she stood before Thornfield Market, watching as the merchant's brow furrowed with contempt. Her basket trembled in her grasp, for this was the third stall to turn her away. "We'll not be serving the likes of you, Miss Ellison," the ruddy-faced man pronounced, loud enough for neighboring patrons to hear. "Not after what's been said, not after what's been printed." Her heart faltered, but her chin remained level. "Sir, I know not what slander you speak of. I require only tea and bread." "Tea and bread," he laughed, a harsh sound that drew more onlookers. "Perhaps you ought to ask your employer at Ravenwood." "Oh, but they've dismissed you, haven't they? A governess without character references is hardly better than—" "Than what precisely?" Clara challenged, though her voice betrayed the slightest tremor. "A woman seeking honest trade." The merchant leaned forward, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Than a woman who corrupts her charges with stories of impropriety. The Blackwood children speak of your midnight wanderings, Miss Ellison. Their mother found your letters. Letters she had never written. Accusations she could not fathom." Clara's fingers tightened around her basket's worn handle as whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. London was a city of fog and rumours, and both had a way of penetrating the most guarded homes. "I have done nothing of which to be ashamed," she stated, her voice steady despite the cold dread coursing through her veins. "Then explain why Lady Blackwood herself has warned every household in Belgravia against employing you." A woman's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp as a blade. Lady Honoria Vale emerged from the crowd, her ivory gloves spotless, her smile a perfect crescent of malice. Imagine my surprise, discovering the disgraced governess shopping as though she were still respectable. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Lady Honoria, whose nephew she had once tutored, whose hatred had begun when the child preferred Clara's gentle instruction to his aunt's cold discipline. "My lady," Clara curtsied, pride warring with necessity. "I have committed no crime. Character is all a governess possesses," Lady Honoria announced to the growing audience, her voice carrying across the marketplace. "Without it, she is merely another beggar woman, and London has quite enough of those, wouldn't you agree?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Clara's cheeks burned, but she would not lower her gaze. 6 years of educating the children of the wealthy had taught her that dignity was sometimes the only possession one could claim. "If that will be all, my lady," Clara said, turning to leave, knowing her market basket would remain empty this day. But Lady Honoria was not finished. "I wonder, has anyone told Mr. Ashcombe of your disgrace, the wounded veteran who walks in Regent's Park? I've observed your conversations. Such familiarity between a ruined soldier and a ruined governess, how perfectly matched." The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Edward Ashcombe, the man whose quiet words and gentle manner had been Clara's only solace these past weeks. A former officer, they said, wounded in India, his family fortune lost to poor investments and gambling debts. He walked with a cane and spoke rarely of himself, but his eyes, those amber eyes, held kindness when the world offered none. "Mr. Ashcombe is a gentleman," Clara said softly. "His circumstances do not define him." "Circumstances?" Lady Honoria laughed. "Is that what we call it when a man's own father disowns him? When he skulks about London rather than showing his face at respectable gatherings? You would defend him, I suppose, having no reputation of your own to preserve." Before Clara could respond, a hush fell over the marketplace. A tall figure stood at its edge, leaning on a polished cane, his face half-shadowed by the brim of his hat. Edward Ashcombe had never looked imposing. His coat was well made but worn, his boots polished but scuffed, yet something in his bearing commanded silence. "Lady Honoria," he said, his voice carrying despite its softness, "I find the morning air exceedingly favourable for gossip. Might I suggest you save some for your afternoon tea parties?" He approached steadily, each step measured, until he stood beside Clara. Without looking at the astonished crowd, he offered his arm to her. "Miss Ellison, I believe you mentioned needing assistance with some purchases. May I be of service?" The crowd parted like water around stone as he led her away, her hand trembling slightly on his sleeve. "Mr. Ashcombe," she whispered, "you mustn't. Your reputation is already in tatters, much like yours, it seems," he replied with a wry smile. "Tell me, what falsehoods has Lady Honoria been spreading about you?" The market bells chimed 3 times, echoing in the sudden silence as they walked away from the crowd, 2 ruined souls finding unexpected alliance in the morning mist. The parlour of Mrs. Finch's boarding house held no luxury, yet Clara found herself grateful for its faded dignity. The landlady, a widow of moderate means and immoderate opinions, had not yet heard of Clara's disgrace, and thus her small room remained secure, if only temporarily. Edward Ashcombe sat across from her, his posture too rigid for the sagging armchair. Between them, a plain tea service offered warmth their circumstances could not provide. "You have been more than generous, Mr. Ashcombe," Clara said, her fingers working at the frayed edge of her shawl. "But I cannot allow you to purchase my groceries indefinitely. I must find employment." "And you shall," he replied, setting down his cup with careful precision, "though it seems Lady Honoria is determined to close every door in London to you. She has harboured resentment since I tutored her nephew. The boy preferred books to her indulgences, and she never forgave me for it." Clara poured more tea, the ritual steadying her hands. "But her accusations regarding midnight wanderings and letters, I cannot fathom their source." Edward studied her with eyes that seemed to hold fragments of sunlight despite the grey afternoon. "Someone wishes to remove you from society's considerations. The question is why. I am hardly significant enough to warrant such attention. Perhaps it is not your significance, but your presence that disturbs them." His fingers, bearing the calluses of a soldier rather than a gentleman, traced the rim of his teacup. "You said Lady Honoria mentioned our conversations in the park." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "She suggested impropriety where none exists." "None." His smile held a hint of something that made Clara's heart quicken. "I had hoped our discussions of literature and philosophy might constitute some minor impropriety, given their frequency." Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. "Mr. Ashcombe, you are teasing me at the most inappropriate time." "Inappropriate timing is my foremost talent, Miss Ellison." His expression sobered. "But there is a matter of great importance I must discuss with you, a proposition of sorts." The parlour suddenly seemed smaller, the air charged with unspoken possibilities. "I fear I have little to offer in business matters," Clara said carefully. "This is not business." Edward leaned forward, his voice lowered though they were alone. "Miss Ellison, Clara, I am aware of how this will sound coming from a man in my position, but I must speak plainly. We are both outcasts from the society that once barely tolerated us. Your reputation is unjustly tarnished, and mine," he paused, "mine is damaged by my own family's rejection and financial ruin." Clara's pulse quickened. "Mr. Ashcombe, Edward, please." He drew a deep breath. "What I propose is an alliance of mutual benefit, a marriage." The teacup nearly slipped from Clara's fingers. "Sir, you cannot be serious." "I have never been more earnest," he replied. "Hear me, please. As husband and wife, we might face society's scorn together rather than separately. I have enough to provide modest security. A small cottage in Devonshire left to me by my mother. It is not grand, but it is far from London's cruelties." "You speak of marriage as though it were merely a practical arrangement," Clara whispered. His gaze did not waver. "I speak of it as salvation for us both. But I would not insult you by pretending my heart is uninvolved. Our conversations in the park have been the only brightness in my darkened days. Your mind, your gentle spirit." He stopped, composing himself. "Forgive me. I do not wish to overwhelm you with sentiments that might seem convenient given our circumstances." Clara set down her cup, studying the man before her. His clothes were worn but impeccable, his manner gentle despite his obvious military background. In his eyes she saw not desperation, but resolve. "The world would say you offer from pity," she said softly. "The world knows nothing of what passes between two souls," he countered. "I offer from necessity, yes, but also from genuine regard. We may not have the luxury of lengthy courtship, but we have understanding between us. Is that not a foundation many marriages lack?" Before Clara could respond, a sharp knock rattled the parlour door. Mrs. Finch entered without waiting for permission, her face flushed with indignation. "Miss Ellison, I have just received the most disturbing letter regarding your character," she announced, brandishing a paper sealed with pale blue wax. "Lady Honoria's signature colour. I cannot possibly allow—" "Mrs. Finch," Edward interrupted, rising to his full height. "Miss Ellison has done me the honour of accepting my proposal of marriage. Whatever slander you have received matters not, as she will shortly be leaving your establishment as Mrs. Edward Ashcombe." Clara's breath caught. She had not yet answered him. Mrs. Finch's mouth opened and closed like a startled fish. "Marriage, but I was told—" "You were told falsehoods by those who make sport of ruining innocent women," Edward said firmly. "Now if you would grant us privacy to complete our discussion, I would be most grateful." When the flustered landlady withdrew, Edward turned back to Clara, his expression asking the question his lips had not. "You spoke as though I had already accepted," she said quietly. "Forgiveness is easier to obtain than permission," he replied, "but the choice remains entirely yours." Clara looked down at her worn gloves, then at the letter in Mrs. Finch's hand, visible through the partially open door. The world was closing around her like a trap. "When would this marriage take place?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Tomorrow, if possible. I have a friend, Thomas Hale, who could witness. A small chapel on the outskirts of the city would ask few questions." Clara raised her eyes to meet his. "Then yes, Mr. Ashcombe, Edward, I accept your proposition." The mantel clock chimed once, marking the moment when two ruined lives chose to forge a single path forward, neither knowing that London society would soon be forced to reconsider what ruin truly meant. St. Agnes Chapel stood like a forgotten sentinel at London's edge, its stone facade weathered by decades of indifference. It was here, on a misty morning 3 days after Edward's proposal, that Clara Ellison became Mrs. Edward Ashcombe. No flowers adorned the altar, no family filled the pews. Only Thomas Hale, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and an inexplicable deference to his supposedly ruined friend, stood witness. "The circumstances are less than ideal," Thomas murmured to Clara as they signed the parish register, his voice carrying a hint of apology. "But I have never seen Edward make a wiser decision." The clergyman, a thin man with perpetually lowered eyes, handed Edward the marriage certificate with a perfunctory nod. He had asked no questions when presented with Edward's coin, though Clara had noted how the man's gaze lingered on her plain dress and Edward's weathered greatcoat. "Mrs. Ashcombe," Edward said, as they emerged into the pale sunlight, the title still foreign to Clara's ears. "Shall we walk? There is a matter we must discuss before departing for Devonshire." They strolled arm in arm along a narrow lane, Thomas trailing behind at a respectful distance. Clara's borrowed ring, an old family piece Edward had produced from his waistcoat pocket, felt heavy on her finger, its single pearl glowing softly against the gold band. "I must confess something," Edward said finally, his steps slowing. "I have not been entirely forthcoming about our living arrangements." Clara's heart faltered. "The cottage exists," he assured her quickly. "But before we retire to Devonshire, there is a duty I must fulfill in London. My father's solicitor has requested a meeting regarding some final matters of my disinheritance. I had hoped to avoid it, but Thomas convinced me it would be unwise to leave such business unresolved." "Of course," Clara nodded. "When is this meeting to take place?" "Tomorrow morning. I've taken rooms for us at the Gilded Oak, a modest inn but respectable. Thomas has assured me of its discretion." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implications of shared lodgings, however proper their marriage might be. As if sensing her thoughts, Edward continued softly, "You need fear nothing from me, Clara. Ours is a marriage of mutual protection and respect. I shall not presume upon rights I have not earned." "You are very kind," she replied, though the word seemed insufficient for the man who had rescued her from disgrace. They walked in silence until reaching a small tea-house where Thomas had arranged a modest wedding breakfast. As they approached its wooden door, however, Clara froze. Through the window, she glimpsed a familiar face, Lady Beatrice Ashcombe, the dowager aunt whom Edward had mentioned only in passing. "Edward," she whispered, "your aunt." His face paled slightly. "Thomas, did you—" "She insisted," Thomas replied with an apologetic shrug. "Said she had a right to meet the woman brave enough to ally herself with the family's black sheep." Before Clara could protest, the door swung open and Lady Beatrice emerged, a stately woman of perhaps 50 years, her silver-streaked hair arranged beneath a modest bonnet. "So this is the governess who has captured my nephew's attention," she said, her keen eyes surveying Clara from head to toe. "You are younger than I expected." "Aunt Beatrice," Edward began, his voice tight, "this was to be a private affair." "Private affairs are luxury items, my dear boy, which you forfeited when you chose your particular path." Her gaze returned to Clara. "Well, come inside, both of you. The tea is growing cold and I detest waste almost as much as I detest secrets." The tea-house's private room held a spread far more elaborate than Clara had anticipated. Fresh scones, clotted cream, strawberry preserves, and a selection of small sandwiches arranged on silver trays. "Thomas suggested you might appreciate a proper celebration," Lady Beatrice explained, noting Clara's surprise. "Though I added a few touches of my own. One doesn't marry every day, even under such unusual circumstances." They seated themselves around the table, an awkward quartet. Clara observed how Edward's posture remained rigid, how his fingers tensed around his teacup whenever his aunt spoke. I must say, Mrs. Ashcombe, Lady Beatrice continued, emphasizing the title with subtle emphasis, you have caused quite a stir in certain circles. Lady Honoria Vale was particularly vocal at yesterday's Literary Society meeting. Something about letters and midnight wanderings. Fabrications, Edward stated firmly. Clara has been unjustly maligned. Indeed? How convenient that her reputation should be damaged just as she begins walking with you in Regent's Park. Lady Beatrice's smile was enigmatic, almost as though someone feared her influence. Clara set down her teacup. My lady, if I may speak plainly, please do. Plain speaking is refreshing in a world of ornate lies. I do not understand why anyone would trouble themselves over a governess's reputation. Was of no consequence to London society. Lady Beatrice's eyebrow arched. Perhaps it is not your past position that concerned them, but your potential future one. An uncomfortable silence descended, broken only when Thomas cleared his throat. I've taken the liberty of arranging transport to the Gilded Oak. Your belongings have been delivered there already. Edward nodded gratefully. Thank you, Thomas. You have been more than a friend these past months. These past decades, you mean, Lady Beatrice corrected. Since you were boys climbing trees on the estate and ruining your Sunday clothes. She turned to Clara. Did you know they once freed all the hunting dogs before the midsummer hunt? The Duke was furious. The Duke, Clara repeated, confusion clouding her features. A strange tension filled the room. Thomas's gaze dropped to his plate, and Edward's jaw tightened visibly. My father, Edward said quietly, before his title passed to my cousin. Ah, Lady Beatrice's smile turned sharp. Is that the tale you've shared? How fascinating. Aunt Beatrice, Edward's voice held a warning. Very well, very well. She waved her hand dismissively before turning to Clara. My dear, whatever circumstances brought you to this marriage, I find myself inclined to approve of you. There is a steadiness in your countenance that suggests character beyond your years. Thank you, Clara replied, uncertain whether she had just received a compliment or undergone an assessment. As they finished their tea, Lady Beatrice drew a small package from her reticule. A wedding gift, she announced, placing it before Clara. Something every bride should possess, regardless of her circumstances. Clara unwrapped the silk-covered package to reveal a pair of fine kid leather gloves, their pearl buttons matching the modest ring on her finger. They were mine when I was younger, Lady Beatrice explained. Before arthritis claimed my fingers' elegance. I thought perhaps... They're beautiful, Clara whispered, genuinely touched. I shall treasure them. Wear them tomorrow, Lady Beatrice instructed, to the solicitor's office. A woman's hands reveal much about her station, and you, my dear, are now an Ashcombe. As they prepared to depart, Lady Beatrice drew Edward aside, their conversation too low for Clara to hear. She watched her husband's face, for he was her husband now, transform from tension to resignation, then to something like resolve. Thomas offered his arm as they stepped out onto the cobblestone street. You've married into a complicated family, Mrs. Ashcombe, he said quietly. All families have their complexities, Clara replied, watching Edward's tall figure as he concluded his conversation with his aunt. Some more than others, Thomas murmured. But I believe you may be exactly what Edward needs, what we all need, to heal old wounds. Before Clara could question his meaning, Edward returned to them, his expression unreadable. The carriage awaits, he announced, offering Clara his arm. As they departed, she glanced back to see Lady Beatrice watching them, her expression a curious mixture of satisfaction and concern. Behind her, just visible through the tea-house window, a man in fine clothing observed their departure, his face partially obscured by the glass. The carriage door closed with a firm click, sealing them inside as the horses moved forward into the London fog. Clara sat beside her new husband, aware that she had stepped into a story far more complex than a simple tale of two ruined souls finding refuge together. Edward, she began carefully, your aunt mentioned... My aunt enjoys creating drama where none exists, he interrupted, though his tone remained gentle. Tomorrow, after the solicitors' meeting, we shall leave for Devonshire, and London's machinations will be behind us. But as the carriage wound through London's crowded streets, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were moving not away from society's gaze, but directly into its focus. The Gilded Oak Inn presented a facade of modest respectability, its windows clean, its doorstep swept, its sign freshly painted. Yet as Clara followed Edward through its narrow corridor, she sensed a gentle decline in its fortunes, much like their own. Mrs. Ashcombe, sir, the innkeeper announced, showing them to a small suite comprising a sitting room and 2 adjoining bedchambers. The furnishings were worn but polished, the linens clean if somewhat faded. Clara's single trunk sat beside a larger one she presumed was Edward's. "Will this be suitable?" Edward asked once they were alone, his concern evident. "It is more than adequate," she assured him, removing her bonnet and gloves. The pearl buttons of Lady Beatrice's gift had drawn admiring glances from the innkeeper's wife, confirming the older woman's wisdom about such matters. Edward crossed to the window, gazing out at the busy street below. "I must leave you briefly to consult with Thomas about tomorrow's meeting. Will you be comfortable here?" "Perfectly so," Clara replied, though in truth she felt adrift in this new reality of being wife rather than employee. "Perhaps I might arrange our belongings while you're gone." He smiled, the expression warming his solemn features. "You needn't perform domestic duties quite so quickly, Clara. Rest if you wish. Order tea. The room is paid for in full, including any reasonable services you might desire." After his departure, Clara found herself unable to sit idle. She arranged her modest wardrobe in the smaller bedchamber, noting how Edward's trunk remained firmly closed, as if guarding secrets within. The sitting room held a small writing desk, upon which she discovered a leather-bound volume, Wordsworth's poems well worn and marked with thin strips of paper at several pages. Time passed peacefully until a sharp knock disturbed the afternoon quiet. Expecting Edward, Clara opened the door to find a uniformed messenger boy clutching an envelope. "For Mrs. Ashcombe," he announced, presenting it with a flourish that suggested a generous tip had accompanied its delivery. The envelope bore no sender's name, only her new married name written in an elegant feminine hand. Breaking the pale blue seal, Lady Honoria's signature colour, Clara withdrew a single sheet of expensive stationery. "My dear Mrs. Ashcombe, how swiftly you have elevated yourself from disgraced governess to married woman. Accept my congratulations on securing a husband whose ruin matches your own. Birds of similar plumage do indeed flock together, though I wonder if you truly understand which species you have joined. Perhaps you might inquire about the circumstances of your husband's disinheritance, or why a man of his background would choose a penniless governess rather than attempting reconciliation with his family. Men of desperate circumstances often make desperate choices. The solicitor your husband meets tomorrow, Mr. Hargrove of Hargrove, Wells and Pierce, might provide illumination should you accompany your new spouse. I imagine there are many fascinating details about the Ashcombe estate that would interest its newest attachment. With sincere regards, Lady Honoria Vale." Clara's hands trembled as she refolded the letter. How had Lady Honoria discovered her whereabouts so quickly? The marriage had been conducted in utmost privacy, yet news had evidently travelled. More disturbing were the insinuations about Edward. Clara had accepted his account of familial estrangement and financial ruin without question, believing his quiet dignity reflected inner truth. What possible motive could he have for marrying her, if not the mutual protection he had proposed? She was still pondering this when Edward returned, his expression brightening upon seeing her, then darkening as he noted the letter in her hand. "You've received correspondence already?" he inquired, removing his hat and coat. "From Lady Honoria," Clara admitted, seeing no reason to dissemble. "She appears remarkably well informed about our movements." Edward's jaw tightened. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand for the letter. Clara passed it to him, watching carefully as he read. His posture remained unchanged, but a muscle in his cheek twitched visibly. "She suggests I accompany you to the solicitors' meeting tomorrow," Clara said when he had finished, "though I understand if you prefer to attend alone." "On the contrary," Edward replied, his voice carefully controlled. "I would be grateful for your company. Mr. Hargrove can be rather formidable." "The letter implies there are aspects of your situation you haven't shared," Clara ventured carefully. Edward returned the letter to her, his gaze direct. "Lady Honoria specializes in implication and insinuation. It is her primary weapon in society's drawing rooms. Yet she knew of our marriage and of your meeting tomorrow. London thrives on information, traded like currency." He crossed to the fireplace, staring into its empty grate. "Thomas likely mentioned our plans to someone who mentioned them to someone else, and eventually the details reached her." It was a reasonable explanation, yet something in his manner, a slight hesitation perhaps, gave Clara pause. "Edward," she said softly, "I have entrusted you with my future. I ask only for honesty in return." He turned to face her, his expression pained. "You deserve complete candor, Clara, but some truths are not mine alone to reveal." His gaze held hers, pleading for understanding. Can you trust me until tomorrow? After the meeting, I promise you shall know everything." Before she could respond, another knock interrupted them. This time, a hotel servant delivered a heavy envelope bearing the embossed letterhead of Hargrove, Wells and Pierce, solicitors. "Urgent correspondence for Mr. Ashcombe," the man announced, bowing slightly. Edward accepted the envelope with evident reluctance, breaking its wax seal once they were alone again. As he read its contents, Clara observed a transformation, his shoulders straightening almost imperceptibly, his bearing shifting from that of a wounded man to something altogether different. "Is everything in order?" she inquired when he had finished. "It would appear," he replied carefully, "that Mr. Hargrove wishes to see us both. The meeting has been moved forward to this evening rather than tomorrow morning." He folded the letter precisely. "We are requested at his offices by 7 o'clock. This evening?" Clara glanced at the small clock on the mantel. "That's scarcely 2 hours hence." "Indeed." Edward's expression was unreadable. "It seems our affairs have suddenly become rather urgent to multiple parties." Clara moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening London sky. Clouds gathered on the horizon, promising evening rain. "Do you think Lady Honoria's letter and this change are connected?" "I think," Edward said slowly, "that London society has decided we are more interesting than our supposed ruin would suggest." He approached, standing beside her at the window, his reflection in the glass overlapping with hers. "Clara, whatever happens this evening, remember that my proposal to you was genuine. My regard is sincere." The earnestness in his voice stirred something in Clara's heart, even as uncertainty clouded her thoughts. "I shall dress for the meeting," she said, retreating to her chamber. As she donned her best dress, a modest navy silk, saved from her days as governess to the Blackwood children, and arranged her hair in a simple chignon, Clara considered Lady Honoria's warning. What species had she joined indeed? The question lingered as she pulled on Lady Beatrice's fine gloves, their pearl buttons gleaming in the lamplight like small, watchful eyes. When she emerged, she found Edward similarly transformed. His worn coat had been replaced by a finer garment of dark wool, his cravat tied with unexpected elegance. He offered his arm with formal courtesy. "You look beautiful, Mrs. Ashcombe," he said, his voice low. "As do you, sir," she replied, noting how his improved attire altered his entire aspect. "One might almost believe we were attending a social engagement rather than a solicitors' meeting." His smile held a curious mixture of apprehension and anticipation. "In London, my dear, the two are often indistinguishable." The hackney coach conveyed them through streets increasingly wet with rain, stopping finally before an imposing building in Lincoln's Inn Fields. Gaslight spilled from its windows, illuminating the brass plaque that read, "Hargrove, Wells and Pierce, Solicitors Estaque 1789. As they approached the entrance, Clara felt Edward's arm tense beneath her hand. "Remember," he said quietly, "whatever transpires within, my feelings for you remain unchanged." The ominous nature of this reassurance caused Clara's heart to quicken. What possible legal matter could affect their nascent marriage? The door opened before Edward could knock, revealing a dignified butler who bowed deeply, too deeply, Clara thought, for visitors of their supposed station. "Mr. Ashcombe, madam," the man intoned. "Mr. Hargrove awaits you in the main office." They were led through a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced men, presumably partners past and present of the distinguished firm. At its end stood a polished oak door, which the butler opened with ceremonial slowness. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashcombe, sir," he announced. The large office beyond held 3 occupants. A corpulent man, Clara presumed to be Mr. Hargrove, seated behind an enormous desk. Lady Beatrice perched on a leather armchair, and to Clara's shock, Lady Honoria Vale, her pale blue gown a stark contrast to the room's sombre tones. "Ah, the newlyweds arrive at last," Lady Honoria purred, her smile sharp as a blade. "How delightful!" Mr. Hargrove rose, his jowls quivering with what appeared to be repressed excitement. "Your Grace," he said, bowing deeply to Edward. "And, Madam, Your Grace." The title hung in the air like a thunderclap, its implications unfurling in Clara's mind, even as the room seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Lady Honoria's victorious laugh rang out. "Oh, my dear Mrs. Ashcombe, or should I say, Your Grace, your expression is positively priceless." The clock on the wall chimed 7 times, each note marking the death of what Clara had believed to be true about the man whose arm she still clutched, whose ring she wore, whose name, whose real name, she suddenly realized she might not even know. Clara's world contracted to a single point of understanding. The man beside her, her husband of mere hours, was not the ruined gentleman he had claimed to be. The solicitor's use of Your Grace admitted only one interpretation. Edward held a ducal title, the highest rank of peerage below royalty itself. "I believe introductions are in order," Lady Beatrice said, her calm voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. "Clara, may I present my nephew Edward James William Ashcombe, the 8th Duke of Wexford?" She paused, her gaze shifting to Edward. "And Edward, it seems you must now properly introduce your Duchess to society." "Duchess?" Clara whispered, the word foreign on her tongue. Edward's face had gone pale, his jaw rigid with tension. "This is not how I intended you to learn the truth," he said quietly. Lady Honoria's laughter rippled through the room again. "Did you intend her to learn it at all, Your Grace? Or was this governess merely another of your experiments in moral philosophy?" "That is quite enough, Lady Honoria," Mr. Hargrove interjected, seemingly recovered from his initial shock. "This meeting was arranged at her ladyship's insistence," he explained to Edward, "though I confess I did not expect, that is to say, your marriage comes as rather a surprise." "A surprise to all of us, I assure you," Lady Honoria added venomously, "particularly to those ladies whose families have spent years cultivating connections to Wexford." Clara's mind raced to reconcile the disparate pieces. Edward had claimed to be disinherited, ruined. Yet he was a duke, presumably wealthy, powerful, and certainly not socially disgraced, as he had led her to believe. "Why?" she asked, finally finding her voice. She turned to face Edward directly. "Why this deception?" Before he could answer, Lady Honoria interjected, "Isn't it obvious? The Duke has always harbored peculiar notions about sincerity and moral worth. This is merely his most elaborate game yet, marrying a penniless governess who believed him equally destitute to prove some philosophical point about true affection. How very modern of you, Your Grace." "You know nothing of my motives," Edward replied, his voice dangerously soft. "I know that you vanished from society 6 months ago, shortly after inheriting the title upon your cousin's death," Lady Honoria countered. "I know that while London buzzed with speculation about your whereabouts, you were apparently playing the role of a ruined gentleman, luring unsuspecting governesses into marriage." "That is a gross mischaracterization," Lady Beatrice said firmly. Clara stepped away from Edward, removing her hand from his arm. The physical distance seemed necessary for clarity. "I would hear the truth from my husband," she said, surprised at the steadiness of her own voice. Edward faced her, his expression raw with emotion she had not previously witnessed. "My father, the former Duke, died 3 years ago. The title passed to my cousin Frederick, as I had been estranged from the family. When Frederick died without heir 6 months ago, the title reverted to me, despite my father's wishes to the contrary." "You were not disinherited?" Clara asked. "From personal possessions and properties not entailed, yes. From the title and its associated estates, no. Such inheritances cannot be redirected by mere paternal disapproval." His voice held a bitterness that seemed genuine. "I returned to London to settle affairs, intending to then retreat to the countryside, but I found society's attitudes insufferable." "So you decided to disappear," Clara said slowly, "to live as a commoner, to live as myself, without the trappings of a title I never wanted, bestowed by a father who rejected me," Edward corrected. "I wish to be valued or not for my character alone." Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat. "While this domestic discussion is undoubtedly fascinating, there are pressing legal matters to address. Your Grace's extended absence has created considerable administrative complications regarding the Wexford estates." "My stewards have managed admirably," Edward replied. "Indeed, but certain decisions require ducal authorization. Properties languish without direction. Tenants await responses to petitions." The solicitor shuffled papers nervously. "And then there is the matter of the London residence, which remains shuttered while Your Grace lodges at an inn." The full magnitude of the deception began to dawn on Clara. Edward, the Duke, owned estates, managed tenants, possessed a London residence grand enough to concern his solicitor. The modest cottage in Devonshire he had promised was likely a mere hunting lodge among dozens of properties. "Clara," Edward began, reaching for her hand. She withdrew it gently but firmly. "You allowed me to believe we were equally disadvantaged, that our marriage represented mutual salvation from difficult circumstances." "It does," he insisted. "My position brings constraints and expectations far more suffocating than those you faced as a governess." Lady Honoria sniffed derisively. How tremendously difficult it must be, carrying the burden of wealth and power. "Honoria, you try my patience," Lady Beatrice warned. Mr. Hargrove, seemingly eager to return to practical matters, produced a stack of documents. "There are several urgent items requiring your Grace's signature. The matter of the Northumberland properties, the renovation of the London house, and of course the settlement papers for her Grace." "Settlement papers," Clara echoed. "For your dowry, naturally," Mr. Hargrove explained, as though addressing a child, or rather, the lack thereof. "Standard procedure would establish an allowance and provisions for widowhood, but given the unusual circumstances—" "Are you suggesting my marriage is invalid?" Edward's voice had grown cold. "Not at all, Your Grace," the solicitor hastened to assure him. "Merely complicated. The Duchess of Wexford traditionally brings significant assets to the union. Lady Honoria's own dowry, had you selected her as your bride, would have included estates in Yorkshire and considerable investments in—" "Mr. Hargrove," Edward interrupted, "I did not select Lady Honoria, nor any other eligible heiress. I married Miss Ellison, Mrs. Ashcombe, of my own free will, and with full understanding of her financial situation. Whatever settlements are customary shall be arranged accordingly." Lady Honoria rose, her face flushed with anger. "This is precisely why I insisted on this meeting. London must know that its most eligible duke has thrown himself away on a penniless nobody, and that nobody deserves to understand exactly what she has stumbled into." "I did not stumble," Clara said quietly, drawing all eyes to her. "I made a choice based on the information presented to me. That the information was incomplete does not invalidate the choice itself." Something flickered in Edward's eyes. Hope, perhaps, or admiration. "Clara, however," she continued, her gaze fixed on him, "trust once broken is not easily mended. You concealed your true identity and circumstances, allowing me to believe a falsehood about the man I married." "Not a falsehood," he protested. "I am still that man. The one who walked with you in Regent's Park, who discussed poetry and philosophy, who defended you in the marketplace." "A partial truth, then," Clara conceded, "which in some ways is more dangerous than an outright lie." She turned to Mr. Hargrove. "Sir, I presume these settlement papers require my signature as well?" The solicitor blinked in surprise. "Well, yes, but typically after careful review with your own legal representatives." "I have none," Clara stated flatly. "And as I entered this marriage without expectation of financial gain, I see no reason to delay proceedings on that account. I shall sign whatever is necessary." "Clara," Edward began again, his voice urgent. "Your Grace," she corrected, the formality a shield against the confusion of her feelings. "I believe we have kept Mr. Hargrove long enough this evening. Shall we proceed with the business at hand?" The next hour passed in a blur of legal terminology and signatures. Clara affixed her name to documents she scarcely comprehended, aware only that each signature bound her more tightly to the stranger beside her, the Duke of Wexford, not the ruined Edward Ashcombe she had agreed to marry. Lady Honoria departed with a triumphant smile, her mission of revelation complete. Lady Beatrice remained, occasionally clarifying points of procedure or tradition that Clara might otherwise have misunderstood. When at last the papers were signed and sealed, Mr. Hargrove rose with evident relief. "Allow me to be the first to officially congratulate your Graces on your union. The Duchess of Wexford is entitled to certain privileges and responsibilities which my associate, Mr. Wells, would be happy to outline at a later date." "Thank you, Mr. Hargrove," Edward replied formally. "We shall call upon you tomorrow to discuss the remaining estate matters." As they prepared to depart, Lady Beatrice approached Clara, her expression sympathetic. "My dear, I understand this evening has brought revelations you were unprepared for, but know this, my nephew may have concealed his title, but not his character. That, I believe, you have seen truly." Clara managed a polite nod, though her thoughts remained in turmoil. The butler returned their cloaks, bowing deeply to Clara this time. Her new rank evidently communicated throughout the household with remarkable efficiency. Outside, rain fell steadily from a black sky. Edward helped Clara into the waiting carriage, then hesitated. "Would you prefer that I find alternate accommodations tonight?" The question startled her. Despite everything, the thought of facing this strange new reality alone seemed worse than sharing space with the man who had deceived her. "That won't be necessary," she replied stiffly. "We have appearances to maintain, it seems." The carriage journey passed in silence. Clara stared out the window at the rain-slicked streets of London, trying to reconcile the governess she had been that morning with the Duchess she had apparently become. Beside her, Edward sat equally silent, his profile illuminated occasionally by passing street lamps. Upon returning to the Gilded Oak, they found the innkeeper's manner transformed. News of their true identity, having somehow preceded their return. He bowed repeatedly, addressing them as "Your Grace," with nervous enthusiasm, promising better rooms, special services, anything they might desire. "Our current accommodations are perfectly adequate," Edward assured him, leading Clara upstairs. Once inside their suite, the facade of composure Clara had maintained throughout the evening began to crumble. She removed Lady Beatrice's gloves with trembling fingers. "Clara," Edward said softly, "please allow me to explain." She turned to face him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Explain what precisely? That you married me under false pretenses? That you allowed me to believe we were equals in misfortune when in fact you were playing at poverty?" "I never played at anything with you," he insisted. "Every conversation, every sentiment I expressed was genuine." "Except for the minor detail of your title, wealth, and position," Clara replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her tone. Edward ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she recognized from their earlier days. "The title was thrust upon me against my wishes. The wealth comes with responsibilities I never sought. The position—" he paused. "The position has brought me nothing but false friends, sycophants, and women like Lady Honoria, who see me as a prize to be captured rather than a person to be understood. So you decided to capture a governess instead. How novel." "I decided to live honestly, as the man I am beneath the accidents of birth and inheritance," Edward countered. "And when I met you, when I saw your dignity in the face of injustice, your intelligence despite society's limitations, your kindness despite receiving so little of it, I recognized a spirit that might understand mine." Clara turned away, unwilling to let him see how his words affected her. "You could have told me the truth before the ceremony, before I took vows based on incomplete knowledge. And would you have believed me? Or would you have assumed I was mocking you, a wealthy duke amusing himself with a governess's feelings?" He moved closer, though he did not touch her. "Or worse, would you have married me for my title rather than for mutual protection and companionship?" The question struck uncomfortably close to a truth Clara herself wasn't sure of. Would she have seen beyond the title to the man, had she known from the beginning? "I deserved the chance to make that choice," she said finally. "Yes," Edward agreed, his voice heavy with regret. "You did, and I robbed you of it, out of fear and selfishness. For that I can only ask your forgiveness, though I've no right to expect it." The mantel clock chimed 11, its sound emphasizing the late hour and the exhaustion settling into Clara's bones. "I need time," she said quietly. "This morning I was a disgraced governess. Tonight I'm apparently a duchess. The transition requires adjustment." Edward nodded, his expression solemn. "Of course, take whatever time you need. The smaller bedchamber is yours, as arranged earlier." He moved toward the door to his own room, then paused. "Clara, regardless of titles or expectations, I meant what I said in the chapel this morning. I will honor and protect you, always." As he disappeared into his chamber, Clara sank into a chair, her mind whirling with the day's revelations. From the window, she could see lights still burning across London, a city that would soon be buzzing with news of the Duke of Wexford's unexpected marriage to a mere governess. On the small table beside her lay Lady Honoria's letter, its pale blue seal now broken, its message fulfilled. Clara picked it up, reading it again with new understanding. Lady Honoria had sought to humiliate her, to expose Edward's deception in the most public manner possible, yet in doing so, she had revealed not only his secret, but the depths of his discontent with the very privilege she herself coveted. The letter trembled in Clara's hand as a new thought formed. Perhaps Edward's deception, while inexcusable, came not from malice, but from the same desperate desire that had driven her to accept his proposal, the longing to be valued for oneself alone, unburdened by society's judgments. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her reticule, a reminder of how quickly life could transform, how tenuous truth could be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a duchess's responsibilities, society's scrutiny, her husband's contrition. But tonight, in the quiet of a room that suddenly seemed too small to contain her altered reality, Clara allowed herself one moment of weakness, one silent tear for the simple life she had lost and the complicated one she had unwittingly gained. Beyond her door, she heard Edward pacing, his footsteps a soft counterpoint to the rain against the windows. Two souls bound by vows, separated by truth, united by circumstances neither had fully chosen. The space between them felt vast as an ocean, yet intimate as a shared secret. The rain continued to fall on a London that would awaken to find its most eligible duke, had married a governess. A scandal in the making, a story for the ages, a fairy tale or cautionary legend depending on who told it. And Clara, caught in its center, drifted finally into uneasy sleep, Lady Beatrice's gloves still clutched in her hand like a talisman against a future she could no longer predict. Morning arrived with persistent raps upon their sitting-room door. Clara emerged from her chamber, hastily dressed, to find Edward already admitting Thomas Hale, whose normally cheerful countenance appeared strained. "Your Grace," Thomas began, then, seeing Clara, bowed deeply. "So, Your Grace," he repeated, the identical address making clear her altered status. "Thomas, please," Edward sighed, "let us dispense with formalities among friends." Friends who conceal dukedoms? Clara couldn't resist asking, though she kept her tone light. Thomas had the grace to look abashed. "I advised him to tell you before the wedding for what it's worth." "It is worth precisely nothing now," Edward replied without rancor. "What brings you here at this ungodly hour?" Thomas produced a newspaper from his coat pocket. "I thought you should see this before venturing out." He handed it to Edward, whose expression darkened as he read. "What is it?" Clara asked, moving closer despite herself. Edward passed her the paper without comment. The headline blared across the society page. "Duke of Wexford weds disgraced governess in secret ceremony." Beneath it, a breathless account detailed Edward's mysterious disappearance from society, his shocking reappearance as the husband of a penniless and scandal-plagued instructress of children. "They've been remarkably efficient," Clara observed, her voice steadier than she felt. "We signed the papers only last night." Lady Honoria wasted no time, Thomas confirmed grimly. She was seen entering the newspaper offices directly from Hargrove's. Edward took the paper back, his jaw tight with anger. "They've painted you in the worst possible light, while casting you as either victim or eccentric," Clara noted. "The ruined duke led astray by a scheming governess, or the philosophical aristocrat conducting a social experiment. Neither portrayal is particularly flattering to me." "It's rubbish," Edward declared, tossing the paper aside. "We needn't dignify it with attention." "On the contrary," Clara replied, surprising both men with her calm. "We must address it directly. London society will form opinions with or without our input. Better they hear our version than rely solely on Lady Honoria's." Thomas's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "The Duchess speaks wisdom, Edward. A strategic appearance would do much to counter this narrative." Edward studied Clara with newfound respect. "What do you suggest?" Before she could respond, another knock interrupted them, this one more imperious. The innkeeper himself appeared, practically genuflecting as he announced, "Lady Beatrice Ashcombe requests an immediate audience, Your Graces." Lady Beatrice swept in moments later, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. "Ah, Thomas is here already. Excellent." She gestured dismissively at the newspaper. "I see you've discovered Honoria's handiwork." "We were just discussing how to respond," Clara explained. "Indeed? And what strategy had you devised?" Lady Beatrice settled herself on the room's best chair, appraising Clara with keen interest. Conscious of 3 pairs of eyes upon her, Clara straightened her posture. "The article portrays me as either manipulative or pathetic. Neither serves our interests. I propose we attend an event where society can observe us directly, preferably one where Lady Honoria will be present. The Harrington musical evening." Lady Beatrice nodded approvingly. "Tonight at 8. All of London will attend, including our dear Honoria, who would never miss an opportunity to display her mediocre soprano." "A musical evening?" Edward frowned. "Clara has been thrust into this position without preparation or proper wardrobe." "I am not without resources," Clara interrupted. "My training as a governess included deportment suitable for formal occasions, if not participation in them. As for wardrobe," she hesitated. "Already addressed," Lady Beatrice announced with satisfaction. "My modiste will arrive within the hour. The Duchess of Wexford shall not be outshone at her first public appearance." She turned to Edward. "Meanwhile, you must open the London house immediately. The Duke and Duchess cannot continue residing at an inn, however respectable." Edward's expression suggested he might argue, but after a glance at Clara, he simply nodded. "I'll see to it today." "Thomas, would you accompany me? There will be staff to engage, arrangements to make." "Of course," Thomas agreed readily. "Excellent," Lady Beatrice declared. "I shall remain with Clara to oversee preparations. A duchess's debut requires careful management." After the men departed, a tense silence fell between the women. Clara moved to the window, gazing out at a London that now viewed her through an entirely different lens. "You are angry," Lady Beatrice observed. "With Edward, certainly, but perhaps with me as well." "You participated in his deception," Clara replied, not turning from the window. "I facilitated his independence," Lady Beatrice corrected. "My nephew has carried burdens you cannot imagine. His father, my brother, was a cruel and demanding man who saw Edward not as a son but as an heir to be moulded. When Edward chose military service over politics, his father's rage was terrible to behold." Clara turned, curiosity overcoming resentment. "Edward served in the military. That part was true." "Oh yes, distinguished service in India. The limp from his wound is slight but genuine." Lady Beatrice's expression softened. "Much of what you know of him is truth, Clara. His title is merely a circumstance of birth, not the substance of his character." "A rather significant circumstance," Clara noted dryly. Lady Beatrice laughed, a warm sound that reminded Clara of Edward's rare chuckles. "Indeed. One that brings privileges and constraints in equal measure." Her amusement faded. "You face a choice now. You may view Edward's deception as unforgivable betrayal and live as Duchess in name only. Many aristocratic marriages survive on less. Or you may seek to understand the man behind the title and perhaps forge something genuine from these inauspicious beginnings." Before Clara could respond, a commotion in the corridor announced the arrival of Madame Beaumont, London's première modiste, accompanied by 2 assistants carrying boxes and fabric samples. The next several hours dissolved into a whirlwind of measurements, fabric selections and hasty alterations to gowns that simply must do for tonight, while others were commissioned for future occasions. Throughout the fitting, Lady Beatrice offered guidance on everything from appropriate jewelry to the correct angle for holding a fan. "The first rule of aristocratic survival," she advised, "is to appear as though you've never known any other life. Confidence disguises all manner of unfamiliarity." By late afternoon, Clara stood transformed. The modest navy silk had been cleverly reworked with lace panels and an elegant overskirt. Her hair was arranged in a more sophisticated style, adorned with pearl pins that matched her wedding ring. The woman reflected in the mirror bore little resemblance to the Governess who had stood humiliated in Thornfield Market mere days ago. "You shall outshine every debutante," Lady Beatrice declared with satisfaction. "Honoria will be livid." "Is that our goal?" Clara asked, adjusting a pearl earring, another of Lady Beatrice's loans that felt suspiciously like gifts. "One of many," the older woman replied cryptically. "Ah, I believe your husband has returned." Edward entered moments later, stopping abruptly at the sight of Clara. Something indefinable flashed in his eyes, admiration certainly, but tinged with regret, as though seeing physically manifested the transformation his deception had wrought. "Clara," he said softly, "you look like a duchess," she supplied, her tone carefully neutral. "Like yourself," he corrected, "but as you might have been born to this role." An unexpected warmth blossomed in Clara's chest, quickly suppressed. "What news of the London house?" Edward seemed to accept her change of subject. "It will be ready by tomorrow. Tonight I've arranged for us to depart directly from the Harrington affair to Wexford House. The staff is minimal but sufficient for our immediate needs." "Wexford House," Clara repeated, the name foreign on her tongue. "I don't even know where it's located." "Berkeley Square," Lady Beatrice supplied. "The north side, one of London's finest residences, when properly maintained." A carriage arrived as dusk fell, not a hired hackney this time, but the Duke of Wexford's own conveyance, complete with liveried footmen and a coat of arms emblazoned on its glossy door. Clara entered it with outward composure, though inwardly she marveled at how rapidly her circumstances continued to transform. Edward joined her, dressed now in evening attire that emphasized his aristocratic bearing. Gone was any trace of the ruined gentleman she had married. In his place sat a duke, confident, powerful, and unmistakably born to privilege. "You needn't maintain this facade of acceptance," he said quietly, as the carriage rolled forward. "I know you're still angry." "Anger serves little purpose tonight," Clara replied. "We must present a united front, whatever our private feelings." Edward studied her with that same inscrutable expression from earlier. "You adapt remarkably well to circumstances." "A necessary skill for a governess," she observed. "Children are unpredictable. One must be flexible." "And duchesses?" he inquired. "What skills do they require?" Clara met his gaze directly. "I suppose I shall discover that tonight, shan't I?" They rode in silence through London's fashionable districts, eventually joining a line of carriages approaching a brightly lit mansion. Footmen opened their door, and Edward offered his arm with formal courtesy. Clara accepted it, acutely aware of the whispers that followed their progress up the marble steps. At the entrance stood Lord and Lady Harrington, their faces a study in barely concealed shock, as the Major Domo announced, "His Grace the Duke of Wexford and Her Grace the Duchess." "Your Grace," Lady Harrington recovered first, curtsying to Edward, before turning uncertain eyes to Clara. "And, Your Grace, what an unexpected pleasure." "Lady Harrington," Edward replied smoothly, "may I properly introduce my wife, the former Miss Clara Ellison, now Duchess of Wexford." Clara curtsied with practiced grace, thanking her years of instructing young ladies in proper etiquette. "Your home is lovely, Lady Harrington. How kind of you to welcome us." The practiced pleasantry seemed to reassure their hostess, who visibly relaxed. "The honor is ours, Your Grace. Please do come in." The music is about to begin. As they entered the crowded ballroom, a wave of silence spread from the doorway inward, conversations failing like dominoes as guests recognized the Duke of Wexford and his unexpected bride. Clara felt Edward's arm tense beneath her gloved hand. "Courage," she murmured, pitching her voice for his ears alone. "They can whisper, but they cannot touch us." His expression softened momentarily. "You comfort me," when it should be the reverse. Before she could respond, Lady Beatrice appeared before them, creating a buffer between the ducal couple and the curious crowd. "Nephew, Clara, you've caused quite the stir. Excellent timing. Honoria has just taken her seat by the pianoforte. Her expression is positively murderous." Clara's gaze found Lady Honoria across the room, resplendent in pale blue silk that matched the seal on her malicious letter. Their eyes met briefly, Honoria's narrowing in barely concealed fury before she deliberately turned away. "She expected us to hide," Clara realized aloud, "to be shamed into seclusion by her article." "Honoria never understood Edward," Lady Beatrice replied. "She saw the title, the estates, the connection, never the man." She patted Clara's hand encouragingly. "Now, stand tall, smile serenely, and let me introduce you to a few key allies. In London society, strategic friendships are as important as avoiding strategic enemies." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions, each more overwhelming than the last. Clara met dowagers who examined her through lorgnettes, young ladies who curtsied with varying degrees of sincerity, and gentlemen whose appraising glances Edward met with cool authority. Throughout it all she maintained a quiet dignity, neither apologizing for her background nor pretending to a familiarity with aristocratic customs she did not possess. "You're doing remarkably well," Edward murmured during a brief moment alone as they awaited the start of the musical program. "Half the room is already won over." "And the other half?" Clara inquired. "Reserves judgment until they see how Lady Harrington receives you," he replied honestly. "Society follows its leaders." As if summoned by his words, Lady Harrington approached, accompanied by an elderly woman leaning heavily on an ebony cane. "Your Graces," their hostess began nervously, "the Dowager Countess of Melbury has expressed a particular desire to meet the new Duchess." The ancient Countess squinted at Clara from beneath impressively arched brows. "So you're the governess who's caught Wexford," she declared, her voice carrying despite its quaver. "Let me look at you properly, girl." A hush fell over nearby conversations as the Countess subjected Clara to a prolonged inspection. Finally she nodded once, decisively. "Good bone structure, intelligent eyes, stands properly, spine like a sword. You'll do, Duchess." Clara curtsied deeply. "You are most kind, Lady Melbury." "Kind? Nonsense, practical. Tired of these insipid debutantes with nothing in their heads but fashion plates and gossip." The Countess turned her piercing gaze to Edward. "You've chosen better than your father did, Wexford. Perhaps you've more sense than the last 3 generations of Ashcombs combined." Edward bowed, a genuine smile warming his features. "High praise indeed, my lady. Remember it when I'm dead, and they're all claiming they supported this match from the beginning," the Countess retorted. She thumped her cane for emphasis, then allowed Lady Harrington to lead her to a prime seat for the musical performance. As the guests began settling into their places, Lady Honoria made her move. She approached with deadly grace, 2 companions trailing in her wake like pallbearers at Elegance's funeral. "Your Grace," she addressed Edward, deliberately ignoring Clara. "How extraordinary to see you in society again. We had quite given up hope of your return to civilization." "Lady Honoria," Edward acknowledged coolly. I find civilization is defined by the company one keeps, not the addresses one frequents. Honoria's smile tightened. Indeed. How fortunate then that your bride has found herself elevated to such company. At last she turned to Clara, her gaze raking from pearl hairpins to satin slippers. Your Grace, she said, the title dripping with insincerity. What an adjustment this must be for you. From instructing children to instructing a duke. Clara met her gaze steadily. On the contrary, Lady Honoria, as a governess I learned that true education begins with listening rather than speaking. A lesson beneficial in any sphere, I find. A titter of appreciative laughter rose from those close enough to overhear. Honoria's cheeks flushed an unbecoming shade of pink. How quaint. Do share more of your wisdom east with us this season. I'm sure London society will be fascinated by the perspective of one who has risen so far, so unexpectedly. I look forward to the opportunity, Clara replied evenly, though I suspect my observations might prove less fascinating than the motives of those who spread false rumors about governesses they scarcely know. A dangerous light entered Honoria's eyes. False rumors. How curious you should mention such things. I wonder what rumors might circulate about a duke who conceals his identity to marry beneath his station. Edward stepped forward slightly, his posture protective. I wonder what rumors might circulate about a lady who pursues a gentleman so relentlessly that she resorts to slander when rejected. Gasps rippled through the growing audience. Honoria's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. You dare! Lady Honoria, Clara interjected softly, laying a restraining hand on Edward's arm. The musicians await their audience. Shall we continue this delightful conversation another time? For a moment, Honoria seemed poised to launch a more direct attack. Then, with visible effort, she composed herself. Of course, Your Grace. We shall have the entire season to become better acquainted. The threat in her tone was unmistakable. As Honoria swept away, Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I've made an enemy for life, I believe. You had that already, Edward replied, guiding her toward their seats. But you've also made an impression on everyone who witnessed that exchange. Honoria miscalculated severely by confronting you publicly. The musical program began, a series of performances by accomplished amateurs, including Lady Honoria, whose soprano proved as mediocre as Lady Beatrice had promised. Throughout the evening, Clara felt the weight of curious stares, heard the whispered speculations. Yet something had shifted since their arrival. Where initially the whispers had held mockery, they now carried notes of speculation, reassessment, even reluctant admiration. As the final performance concluded, Lady Harrington approached the ducal couple once more. Your Graces, she began, her manner noticeably warmer than at their arrival, the Countess of Melbury has suggested, that is, she rather insisted, that I invite you to my dinner party next Thursday. A small affair, just 30 of our closest friends. Edward glanced at Clara, clearly leaving the decision to her. We would be delighted, Lady Harrington, Clara replied smoothly. Your kindness is most appreciated. More invitations followed as they made their departure, tentative overtures from society matrons who hours earlier might have cut them directly. By the time they entered their carriage, Clara's reticule bulged with calling cards. An unqualified success, Edward observed as they pulled away from the Harrington mansion. You've conquered London in a single evening. Hardly that, Clara demurred. But perhaps we've established that I am neither scheming villain nor pathetic victim. Edward's expression grew serious. Clara, what you did tonight, how you conducted yourself, was extraordinary. You showed more grace under pressure than most who've been duchesses their entire lives. I played a role, she replied, though his praise warmed her despite her lingering anger, as governesses learn to do in difficult households. No, he said firmly. You revealed your true character, which is what first drew me to you. He hesitated, then continued. I know my deception has damaged your trust. I know a single evening of social triumph doesn't erase that breach. But may I hope that in time... The carriage slowed, then stopped. Outside the window, Clara glimpsed an imposing facade, windows ablaze with welcoming light. A footman opened the door, bowing deeply. Your Graces, he announced, welcome to Wexford House. As Clara stepped out onto the pavement, she gazed up at the grand residence, her new home, apparently, the Duke of Wexford's ancestral London seat, the physical manifestation of everything Edward had concealed from her. Edward appeared at her side, offering his arm once more. Shall we? He asked quietly. Clara placed her hand on his sleeve, accepting this next step in their complicated journey. As they ascended the marble steps, a butler thrown the massive doors opened wide. "Your Graces," he intoned, bowing low. "Welcome home." The word hung in the air between them. Home. Its meaning uncertain, its promise unresolved. Clara stepped across the threshold into her new life, aware that tonight had been merely the opening skirmish in a longer campaign. Lady Honoria's enmity, society's judgment, her own confused feelings for the man beside her, all remained to be navigated. Yet as servants lined up to greet their duke and unexpected duchess, Clara held her head high, drawing on the same inner strength that had sustained her through years of serving in others' homes. Tonight, she had played the role of duchess with surprising ease. Tomorrow would reveal whether that role might ever become something more genuine, and whether the marriage begun in deception might somehow find its way to truth. Wexford House revealed itself to Clara in layers of grandeur, each room more imposing than the last. The entrance hall rose 3 stories, crowned by a glass dome that would capture morning light. Marble columns supported a sweeping staircase. Ancestral portraits lined the walls, stern-faced men and serene women, all bearing some resemblance to Edward. "The main salon," Edward announced, leading her through double doors into a vast chamber where crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain above gilt furniture and silk-covered walls. "Not used since my father's time, I'm afraid." Clara noted the Holland covers recently removed from furniture, the faint scent of lemon oil and beeswax that spoke of hasty preparation. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "And rather cold," Edward admitted. "I've instructed the staff to prepare the morning room for our daily use. It's considerably more comfortable." They progressed through a formal dining room capable of seating 40, a music room housing a magnificent pianoforte, a library whose shelves reached high enough to require rolling ladders, and finally into the promised morning room, a relatively intimate space overlooking a walled garden. "This is more sensible," Clara observed, noting the well-worn leather chairs, the desk positioned to catch natural light, the shelves holding books that appeared actually read rather than merely displayed. "My mother preferred this room," Edward explained. "As do I." A discreet cough announced the butler's presence. "Your Graces, cook inquires whether you wish a late supper served." Edward glanced at Clara, who nodded gratefully. The evening's emotional demands had left her famished, despite the light refreshments at the Harringtons. "Yes, Simmons, here, if you please," rather than the dining room. "Very good, Your Grace." The butler hesitated. "And which chambers should be prepared for Her Grace?" An awkward silence fell. Clara realized they had not discussed sleeping arrangements in this new residence, a delicate matter given the uncertain nature of their marriage. "The Duchess will take the blue suite," Edward decided, "adjacent to the master chambers but with its own dressing room and sitting area." "As you wish, sir." Simmons departed, closing the door silently behind him. "I hope that arrangement is acceptable," Edward said once they were alone. "The blue suite was traditionally the Duchess's domain, though it hasn't been occupied since my mother's time." "Any private space will suffice," Clara replied neutrally. Edward ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of frustration that reminded her of the man she'd known in the park. "Clara, I understand your reticence, but we must establish some understanding between us if we're to navigate this new reality." "What understanding would you suggest?" Clara asked, removing her gloves, Lady Beatrice's gift, and placing them carefully on a side table. "I am now apparently the Duchess of Wexford, a role I neither sought nor prepared for, yet must somehow fulfill to society's satisfaction." "Not to society's satisfaction," Edward corrected, "to your own." Clara's laugh held little humor. "My own standards hardly matter now. I've been thrust onto a stage without knowing my lines or my character's motivation." "Your character remains exactly who she was," Edward insisted. "The woman I met in Regent's Park. Intelligent, principled, resilient. The title changes your circumstances, not your essence." "Easy for you to say," Clara countered. "You were born to this world. I am an imposter within it." Edward crossed to where she stood, close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of sandalwood that clung to his evening clothes. "Do you truly believe that, after how you conducted yourself tonight? Lady Honoria has navigated these waters her entire life, yet you bested her with ease." "I maintained composure," Clara corrected. "That hardly constitutes mastery of ducal responsibilities. It demonstrates character, which is far more valuable." Edward's voice softened. "Clara, I know my deception hurt you. I know trust, once broken, requires time to rebuild, but I ask only for the chance to earn that trust again." Before Clara could respond, Simmons returned with 2 footmen bearing trays. A small table was quickly arranged before the fire, laden with cold meats, bread, cheese, fruit, and wine. "Will there be anything else, Your Grace?" Simmons inquired. Edward glanced at Clara, who shook her head slightly. "That will be all, Simmons. We'll ring if needed." When they were alone again, Clara seated herself at the table, grateful for the practical interruption. Edward joined her, pouring wine into delicate crystal glasses. "To new beginnings," he offered, raising his glass. Clara touched her glass to his without comment, the crystal emitting a pure, clear note that seemed to linger in the quiet room. They ate in silence for several minutes, the simple act of sharing food, creating an unexpected intimacy after the evening's public performance. "Your aunt believes I should forgive you," Clara said finally. Edward's hand paused midway to his glass. "And what do you believe?" "That forgiveness should be earned, not granted as a matter of convenience." "I agree," Edward replied, surprising her, "and I intend to earn it however long that might take." Clara studied him, this man who was both stranger and husband, both deceiver and defender. "Why did you disappear from society?" "The true reason, not the philosophical explanation you offered earlier." Edward set down his glass, his expression growing serious. "My father and I were at odds throughout my youth. He demanded perfect obedience to his vision of a proper heir. I sought independence, meaning, when I chose military service, he effectively disowned me. But not officially," Clara prompted. "He couldn't break the entail on the title, but he made clear I was no son of his." Edward's voice remained steady, though Clara sensed old pain beneath his words. "When I returned from India, wounded in both body and spirit, we maintained a cold peace. After his death, my cousin Frederick inherited, which suited me perfectly. I had no desire for the dukedom." "Then Frederick died," Clara supplied. "Unexpectedly, without issue. The title reverted to me despite my father's wishes." Edward's jaw tightened. "I returned to London to settle affairs, intending to establish competent stewards, then retreat to a quieter life. But everywhere I went, I encountered the same fawning deference, the same matchmaking mammas, the same fortune hunters." "Including Lady Honoria," Clara guessed. A wry smile crossed Edward's features. "Especially Lady Honoria. Her pursuit was relentless, her tactics increasingly desperate." "So you simply disappeared?" "I withdrew from society circles, yes. Took modest rooms, walked in public parks, visited small bookshops. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be valued for myself, not my title." His gaze met hers directly. "And then I met you, Clara Ellison, teaching a child to identify birds in Regent's Park, speaking of poetry and philosophy with more insight than I'd heard in a dozen aristocratic salons." Despite herself, Clara felt a warmth spreading through her chest at the memory. Those early conversations had been a balm to her lonely soul, intellectual companionship she'd sorely missed since leaving her teaching position. "You deliberately concealed your identity from me," she said, though the accusation held less heat than before. "At first, through simple omission, I was Edward Ashcombe, which is true enough, merely incomplete. Later," he hesitated, "later I feared that revealing my title would transform how you saw me, that the genuineness between us would be lost." "You didn't trust me to see beyond the title," Clara translated. "I didn't trust anyone," Edward corrected gently. "Years of experience had taught me that dukes have acquaintances, not friends, admirers, not equals. You were the first person in years who spoke to me as a man, not a title." Clara absorbed this, recognizing the lonely echo of her own experience. How many times had she been invisible in aristocratic homes, present but unseen except when needed? "When Lady Honoria orchestrated your disgrace," Edward continued, "I saw an opportunity to offer protection we both needed. I convinced myself that half-truth served a greater purpose." "And now," Clara prompted, "what purpose do you see in our marriage now, Your Grace?" Edward reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. "The possibility of genuine partnership, of shared purpose, of a life where titles and backgrounds matter less than character and understanding." His sincerity was palpable, his gaze unwavering. Clara found herself wanting to believe him, even as caution counseled distance. Before she could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Simmons entered, his usual impassive expression betraying a hint of concern. "Forgive the interruption, Your Graces, but Mr. Hargrove is below. He insists the matter cannot wait until morning." Edward frowned. "Hargrove? At this hour?" "He appears most agitated, sir." Edward glanced at Clara. "Would you prefer to retire? This is likely some tedious legal matter." I'll stay, Clara decided, curiosity overcoming fatigue. As Duchess, I should understand such matters. Edward nodded, a flicker of approval crossing his features. Show him in, Simmons. Moments later, Mr. Hargrove bustled into the room, his corpulent frame suggesting he had come directly from dinner, his flushed face indicating significant wine consumption. Your Graces, he corrected, bowing hastily to Clara. Forgive this unconscionable intrusion, but a matter of grave importance has arisen. Sit, Hargrove, Edward instructed, gesturing to a chair. What couldn't wait until morning? The solicitor extracted a document from his inner pocket, hands trembling slightly. This letter arrived at my office by special messenger just an hour ago. It's from Sir William Blackwood. Clara started at the name. Lady Blackwood's husband? My former employer? The very same, Your Grace. Hargrove mopped his brow with a handkerchief. It seems news of your marriage has reached him, and he makes most disturbing allegations. Edward's expression hardened. What allegations? He claims, most improperly, that Her Grace's dismissal from his household stemmed not from moral impropriety, as was rumoured, but from the discovery of certain documents. Hargrove's discomfort visibly increased. Documents suggesting that Miss Ellison, that is Her Grace, was not who she claimed to be. Clara's blood ran cold. That's absurd. I presented proper references when I joined the Blackwood household. Indeed, Your Grace. But Sir William alleges those references were falsified. He further claims that investigation revealed your true identity to be not Clara Ellison, Governess, but Lady Clara Linwood, daughter of the late Earl of Thornfield. The room seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet. That's impossible, she whispered. Is it? Edward asked quietly, his keen gaze studying her with new intensity. Of course it is, Clara exclaimed. I would know if I were an earl's daughter. Hargrove shifted uncomfortably. Sir William claims to possess documentation proving that the real Clara Ellison died of fever some 15 years ago in Yorkshire. He suggests that Lady Clara assumed this identity after her father's death and the family's financial ruin. This is preposterous, Clara insisted, though a strange roaring had begun in her ears. My parents were respectable, if modest people. My father taught mathematics at a small academy. My mother died when I was young. There is nothing aristocratic in my background. Edward's expression remained unreadable. What documentation does Sir William claim to possess? He does not specify, Hargrove admitted, but he threatens to make his findings public unless... He trailed off, clearly reluctant to continue. Unless, Edward prompted, unless your Grace pays him a considerable sum to maintain silence. Hargrove's jowls quivered with indignation. It's blackmail, sir, plain and simple. It's nonsense, Clara stated firmly. I've never heard of any Earl of Thornfield or Lady Clara Linwood. A curious expression crossed Edward's face. I have, he said slowly. Thornfield was a minor earldom that collapsed under debt some 12 years ago. The Earl died in disgrace, his estate sold to pay creditors. There was a daughter, I believe, who disappeared from society around that time. Clara stared at him, speechless. A memory flashed in her mind, her father's face pale with illness, whispering, Remember who you are, Clara, remember, no matter what comes. She had attributed his words to delirium, for he had died the next day, leaving her alone at 16 to make her way in the world. This is clearly an attempt at extortion, Edward continued, his voice hardening as he addressed Hargrove. Blackwood assumes that as a new Duchess with a controversial background, my wife would be vulnerable to such threats. Most likely, Hargrove agreed, relief evident in his tone. Shall I respond with a firm denial? No, Edward said thoughtfully. Invite Sir William to present his evidence directly to me, tomorrow at noon, here at Wexford House. Edward, Clara protested, you cannot seriously entertain this fiction. Not the fiction, Edward replied evenly. The man behind it. I wish to understand his motives more clearly. He turned back to Hargrove. Make it clear that if his evidence proves fabricated as we expect, the consequences will be severe. After Hargrove departed, Clara paced the morning room, her thoughts in turmoil. This is Lady Honoria's doing, she declared. She's enlisted Blackwood in some scheme to discredit me further. Edward watched her carefully. Possibly, though it's an elaborate fabrication even for Honoria. Clara stopped pacing, suddenly aware of his scrutiny. You cannot possibly believe there's truth in this. I believe, he said slowly, that people are seldom what they first appear, myself included. The irony of his words, coming from a duke who had posed as a ruined gentleman, was not lost on Clara. I am exactly who I claim to be, she insisted, A governess who married a man she believed ruined, only to discover he was a duke in disguise. That story holds quite enough drama without adding fictional earldoms. Edward smiled slightly. Indeed it does. He rose, crossing to stand before her. Whatever Blackwood presents tomorrow, we shall face it together. Now, you should rest. Your first day as Duchess has been rather more eventful than anticipated. A maid waited upstairs to assist Clara into a nightgown that had mysteriously appeared in her new chambers. Lady Beatrice's foresight again, she suspected. The blue suite proved to be a sequence of rooms decorated in varying shades of azure and silver, its furnishings elegant, yet comfortable. The bed alone was larger than her entire chamber at Mrs. Finch's boarding house. As the maid departed, Clara moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit garden below. Beyond it stretched London, a city that had first rejected her, then been forced to acknowledge her as a duchess, and now seemed determined to rewrite her very identity. Was it possible? Could the father she remembered, quiet, scholarly, perpetually worried, have been not a teacher but an earl? Could the modest home of her childhood have been not their true station, but a retreat after financial ruin? No, it was absurd. She would have known, would have remembered such a dramatic change in circumstances. Yet as she prepared for sleep in a duchess's chambers, in a duke's mansion, after an evening spent crossing swords with London's elite, Clara found herself questioning everything she had once held certain. Edward had hidden his true identity. Might her father have done the same? The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as Clara slipped between silk sheets, her mind still churning with questions. What evidence could Sir William possibly present? Why had Lady Blackwood truly dismissed her? And most troubling of all, why did Edward seem to find this preposterous claim worth investigating? Sleep claimed her eventually, but her dreams were fragmented, images of her father alternating with the stern-faced portraits in Wexford House's entrance hall, Lady Honoria's mocking laugh, and Edward's searching gaze asking the question he had voiced earlier, is it impossible? In the darkness of her new bedchamber, surrounded by luxury she had never sought, Clara whispered her answer to the sleeping house. I know who I am, don't I? The question lingered, unanswered, as London's bells marked the passage of night toward a morning that promised yet another transformation in her rapidly changing life. Noon approached with the inexorability of fate. Clara had spent the morning in a state of controlled anxiety, alternating between indignation at Sir William's absurd claims and unsettling doubt about her own past. Edward had breakfasted with her in the morning room, discussing practical household matters as though blackmail allegations were a normal part of marital adjustment. Lady Beatrice will call later, he informed her. She's engaged a social secretary to assist with the correspondence generated by last night's appearance. Correspondence? Clara echoed. Edward gestured to a silver salver piled with envelopes. Invitations, welcome notes, and undoubtedly some less friendly communications. Society has decided you're interesting, which is both blessing and curse. Now, as the mantel clock ticked toward 12, Clara paced the formal drawing room where Edward had decided to receive Sir William. She had chosen a morning dress of deep burgundy, one of Lady Beatrice's emergency commissions, that balanced dignity with subtle authority. You needn't be present for this meeting, Edward reminded her, watching from his position by the fireplace. I could handle Blackwood alone. These allegations concern me directly, Clara replied firmly. I will face them accordingly. A hint of admiration flickered in Edward's eyes. As you wish. Simmons appeared at precisely noon. Sir William Blackwood, he announced with proper gravity. The man who entered was much as Clara remembered, tall, thin, with perpetually pursed lips suggesting constant disapproval. His clothes bespoke wealth without taste, his manner importance without substance. Your Grace? He bowed to Edward, then offered Clara a briefer inclination. Madam. That's Your Grace, Sir William, Edward corrected mildly. You address the Duchess of Wexford. Colour mottled Blackwood's sallow cheeks. Of course, forgive the oversight. Please be seated. Edward indicated a chair positioned to catch unflattering light from the window, a subtle power play Clara might not have noticed days earlier. I understand you claim to possess information regarding the Duchess's background. Sir William settled himself, placing a leather portfolio on his lap. Indeed, Your Grace. Information that came to light during her employment in my household. Which ended how long ago? Edward inquired. 6 weeks, approximately. Yet you've only now found it necessary to bring forward these discoveries. Edward's tone suggested polite skepticism. I had no reason to pursue the matter until learning of your marriage. Sir William replied smoothly. A governess's history is of limited interest. A duchess's is quite another matter. How convenient, Clara observed, unable to maintain silence. What precisely do you allege, Sir William? He turned to her, his expression a mixture of condescension and calculation. Not allegation, Your Grace. Fact. You are not Clara Ellison, daughter of James Ellison, mathematics teacher. You are Lady Clara Linwood, only child of Jonathan Linwood, the late Earl of Thornfield. Clara laughed, though the sound held little humour. Absurd. I would surely recall being an earl's daughter. Would you? Sir William opened his portfolio, extracting several papers. If the transition occurred when you were young, if your father deliberately concealed your background to avoid creditors and scandal? My father was an honourable man, Clara stated flatly. The Earl of Thornfield was indeed honourable, Sir William agreed, until gaming debts and poor investments ruined him. After his estates were sold to satisfy creditors, he retreated to obscurity, taking his young daughter, you, and reinventing himself as a teacher. He handed a document to Edward, who examined it with a neutral expression before passing it to Clara. It was a death certificate for Clara Ellison, aged 9 years, dated 1849, from a village in Yorkshire. This proves nothing, Clara said, though her voice lacked conviction. Ellison is not an uncommon name. Indeed. Sir William produced another document, a faded newspaper clipping reporting the death of Jonathan Linwood, Earl of Thornfield, in 1853. Note the Earl left behind a daughter, Lady Clara, age 16. Clara's hands trembled slightly. 16. Her exact age when her father died. The coincidence was unsettling. Still circumstantial, Edward commented, though his tone had shifted subtly. Sir William smiled thinly. Perhaps this will prove more convincing. He withdrew a small portrait from his portfolio, a miniature of a young woman with chestnut hair and clear grey eyes, wearing a blue dress and pearl eardrops. The resemblance to Clara was unmistakable. Lady Clara Linwood, painted for her 16th birthday, Sir William announced. My wife discovered it among your possessions during your employment, hidden in the false bottom of your writing case. Clara stared at the portrait, memories suddenly assaulting her, her father placing it in her hands as he lay dying, whispering that it was her mother, that she must keep it safe always. But her mother had died when she was very young. She had no clear memories of her face. Where did you get this? She whispered. As I said, from your writing case. When confronted, you claimed it was your mother. Lady Blackwood's suspicions were aroused, leading to further investigation. Sir William's expression turned smug. The Linwood family features are quite distinctive. The portrait was easily identified by an expert. Edward rose, moving to stand beside Clara's chair, his presence steadying. You still haven't explained your purpose in bringing these matters forward, Sir William. Merely to establish truth, Blackwood replied unconvincingly. The Ton should know that the new Duchess of Wexford is actually of noble birth, if somewhat tarnished lineage. How altruistic, Edward remarked dryly. And this truth-seeking requires financial compensation, I understand. Sir William shifted uncomfortably. Compensation for my investigative efforts would be appropriate. My connections at the Herald's office don't come cheaply. I see. Edward's voice hardened. And if this compensation isn't forthcoming, you'll take your discoveries to the newspapers. Information finds its way into circulation, Blackwood hedged. The story of a duke unknowingly restoring an earl's daughter to her proper station would certainly interest the gossip columns. Clara found her voice at last. This is blackmail, Sir William. Nothing more. An unfortunate characterization, Your Grace. His emphasis on her title held subtle mockery. I merely offer you the opportunity to control how this information emerges. Edward moved behind Clara's chair, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. What would prevent us from simply denying your claims? This. Sir William produced his final document with the flourish of a conjurer, revealing his most impressive trick, the birth record of Lady Clara Linwood, showing the distinctive birthmark on her left shoulder, a mark resembling a small crescent moon, according to the attending physician. Clara froze, her hand unconsciously rising to touch her left shoulder through her dress. The crescent-shaped birthmark had been with her all her life, a private detail known only to her and those who had cared for her in childhood. Edward's hand tightened slightly on her shoulder. May I see that document? Sir William passed it over, watching Clara's reaction with undisguised triumph. I see Her Grace recognizes the accuracy of this detail. Clara said nothing, her mind racing through fragments of memory. Her father's insistence on perfect diction and posture despite their modest circumstances, his extensive library, incongruous in their small home, his refusal to discuss their life before she turned 10, the portrait he had claimed was her mother, now revealed as herself. These documents appear convincing, Edward admitted, returning to his seat. However, their sudden appearance and your approach suggest motives beyond historical accuracy. Sir William smiled thinly. My motives are irrelevant if the information is true, and I believe Her Grace's reaction confirms it is. It confirms nothing, Clara stated, though her conviction had wavered. A birthmark is hardly definitive proof of identity. Perhaps not alone, Sir William agreed, but combined with the portrait, the timing of your father's death, and certain aristocratic qualities you've always displayed despite your supposed humble origins, the evidence becomes compelling. What qualities? Clara demanded. Your speech, your bearing, your facility with languages and music, all suggesting early training beyond a mathematics teacher's means. Sir William leaned forward. Lady Blackwood remarked upon it often, how a mere governess carried herself like a lady born. A heavy silence fell. Clara felt suspended between past and present, between the identity she had known and the one now thrust upon her. If there was truth in these claims, her entire history required rewriting, not just her relationship with Edward. What is your proposal? Edward asked finally, his tone businesslike. £10,000, Sir William replied promptly, in exchange for all documentation and complete discretion. Extortion, Clara murmured. Investment, Sir William countered. In your peaceful transition into society. Edward rose, his expression unreadable. You've given us much to consider, Sir William. I'll need to verify these documents independently before any decision can be made. Of course, Your Grace. Blackwood gathered his portfolio, clearly disappointed not to receive immediate payment. I shall await your response, though I should mention that others have expressed interest in this information. Others? Edward's voice sharpened. Lady Honoria Vale was most intrigued when I approached her yesterday, Sir William replied with calculated casualness, though she suggested the matter be brought directly to you first. How considerate of her, Edward remarked coldly. Simmons will show you out. Leave the documents. When Sir William had departed, Clara buried her face in her hands. This is a nightmare. Is it? Edward asked quietly, seating himself beside her. Clara, look at me. She raised her head, meeting his gaze reluctantly. Is there any possibility, he asked carefully, that Sir William's claims contain truth? Clara faltered. I don't know. My earliest clear memories begin around age 10. Before that, there are only fragments. A larger house, servants, my mother's funeral with many people in black. I always assumed they were dreams or imaginings. And the portrait, the birthmark, the portrait my father gave me as he died, claiming it was my mother. The birthmark I've had always. Clara's voice trembled. But this makes no sense, Edward. Why would an earl conceal his daughter's identity? Why raise me to become a governess if I were born to nobility? To protect you, perhaps, Edward suggested. If Thornfield died in debt and disgrace, his creditors might have pursued his daughter as his only heir. An earl's child would have value, to relatives, to social climbers, to those seeking advantage. Clara stood, moving to the window as though distance might grant clarity. So my father, if he was indeed the earl, hid me in plain sight, raised me to earn my living rather than trade on a ruined title. It would explain your education, Edward noted. Your languages, music, deportment, all suggesting early training beyond most governesses. This is madness, Clara whispered, though doubt had taken firm root. My entire life. A fabrication. Edward approached, careful not to touch her. Not a fabrication. Perhaps an adaptation born of necessity and love. She turned to face him, sudden realization dawning. You believe this, don't you? You think I'm this Lady Clara? I think, he said carefully, that the evidence warrants investigation, and that regardless of its truth, Sir William's approach constitutes blackmail, which I won't tolerate. A knock interrupted them. Simmons entered, his dignified demeanor slightly ruffled. Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but Lady Honoria Vale insists upon seeing you immediately. She claims the matter cannot wait. Edward and Clara exchanged glances. Show her in, Edward directed. Let's discover what role she plays in this drama. Lady Honoria swept in moments later, her pale blue visiting dress immaculate, her expression triumphant. Your Graces, she curtsied, the gesture a mockery of respect. I trust Sir William's visit was enlightening? You orchestrated this, Clara stated flatly. Orchestrated hardly. Honoria smiled coldly. I merely facilitated the flow of information. Sir William approached me with his fascinating discovery, and I suggested he bring it directly to you. How altruistic, Edward remarked, echoing his earlier comment to Blackwood. Isn't it? Honoria moved further into the room, examining the documents still scattered on the table. Imagine my surprise to discover that the governess who stole the Duke of Wexford might actually be an earl's daughter. It's almost poetic. The ruined nobleman and the hidden lady, both playing at common lives. What do you want, Honoria? Edward asked directly. She raised perfectly arched eyebrows. Want? Why? Nothing but justice. London deserves to know that its newest duchess isn't quite the rags-to-riches story the gossips claim, that beneath the governess exterior lurked noble blood all along. And this sudden concern for accuracy comes from where exactly? Clara inquired, finding strength in confrontation. Honoria's smile tightened. Perhaps I simply object to deception, Your Grace, a quality you and your husband appear to share in abundance. Edward stepped forward, his patience visibly thinning. Enough games. State your purpose clearly, or depart. Very well. Honoria's pretense at pleasantry vanished. I want acknowledgement that your marriage was based on mutual manipulation, you hiding your title, she hiding her lineage, that your love match was a fraud from its inception. To what end? Clara asked. To ensure London understands that this union deserves neither respect nor emulation, Honoria replied, venom entering her tone, that it represents not romantic triumph, but calculated deception. The raw jealousy in her voice was startling in its intensity. This wasn't merely social maneuvering, it was personal vendetta fueled by rejection and envy. And if we refuse, Edward inquired calmly, then Sir William's discoveries become tomorrow's headline, Honoria threatened, followed by questions about what other secrets the Duchess of Wexford might be concealing. Clara felt a strange calm descend. The past days had thrown her from one identity to another, governess to duchess, now possibly hidden aristocrat. Yet through each transformation, something essential remained unchanged, her determination to face challenges directly. Publish what you will, Lady Honoria, she said evenly. My husband and I have nothing to fear from truth. Honoria's eyes widened in surprise, clearly having expected capitulation rather than defiance. You cannot mean that. Your reputation, my reputation, has already weathered governess to duchess in 3 days, Clara interrupted. I suspect it can manage this revelation as well. Edward moved to stand beside Clara, his shoulder touching hers in silent solidarity. I believe my wife has answered for both of us, Lady Honoria. Simmons will show you out. Honoria's face flushed with anger. You'll regret this defiance. By tomorrow evening, all of London will know the truth about your fraud of a marriage. All of London already believes we're the most interesting couple of the season, Edward replied, a hint of amusement entering his voice. Your revelations will only cement that position. After Honoria's furious departure, Clara sank into a chair, emotional exhaustion overtaking her. What now? Edward seated himself opposite her, his expression thoughtful. Now we determine the truth, whatever it may be. I've already sent for Thomas. He has connections at the Herald's office who can verify these documents' authenticity. And if they are authentic, if I am this Lady Clara, then you've completed the most remarkable circle, Edward replied softly. From nobility through obscurity and back again, not through calculation but through character. Clara studied him, this duke who had hidden as a commoner, who now faced possible scandal with unexpected equanimity. You're taking this rather calmly. A smile touched his lips. When one has spent months concealing a dukedom, one develops perspective on identity's fluid nature. Besides, there's a certain symmetry I find appealing. A duke who pretended to be ruined, married to an earl's daughter who believed herself common. Despite everything, Clara found herself returning his smile, as though we were characters in some improbable novel. More improbable than most, Edward agreed. Though I suspect Lady Honoria fails to appreciate the romantic potential of our situation. Romance was hardly her concern, Clara noted dryly. No, but it might be ours. Edward leaned forward, his expression growing serious. Clara, whatever your birth or background proves to be, know this. I married you for the person you revealed yourself to be in our conversations, not for any hidden identity or advantage. The earnestness in his voice stirred something in Clara's heart, a warmth she had carefully suppressed since discovering his deception. As I married you, she admitted quietly. A knock interrupted the moment. Thomas entered, his expression grave. Edward, "I've brought an unexpected visitor who may shed light on this situation." He stepped aside to reveal a white-haired gentleman leaning heavily on a cane, his weathered face bearing the unmistakable stamp of authority and age. "Lord Melbury," Edward rose in surprise. "This is unexpected." "Necessary nonetheless," the elderly peer replied, his keen eyes fixed on Clara. "I believe I knew your father, young woman. Jonathan Linwood and I were schoolboys together at Eton." Clara stood, uncertain how to respond. "Sir, I don't know if I am indeed his daughter." "No?" Lord Melbury approached, studying her face intently. "The resemblance is unmistakable. You have Eliza's eyes and Jonathan's chin." His gaze softened. "I attended their wedding, you know, and held you at your christening, though you wouldn't remember." A curious sensation washed over Clara, not quite memory, but something deeper, the sense of something long buried finally surfacing. "Why would my father hide my identity?" she asked, voicing the question that had troubled her most. Lord Melbury sighed heavily. Jonathan's financial ruin was complete, but more devastating was the scandal attached to it. Accusations of fraud, threats of imprisonment. He fled London to protect you, his only child, from those who might use you to reach him. "Use me?" Clara echoed. "An earl's daughter, even a ruined one, has value in certain markets," Lord Melbury explained bluntly. "Marriage to rebuild family fortunes, claims against remaining assets, leverage against creditors. Jonathan chose to disappear entirely, giving you the chance at a life free from his mistakes." The explanation aligned with fragmented memories, hasty departures, her father's perpetual worry, his insistence she learn practical skills despite his emphasis on aristocratic education. "How can we verify this with certainty?" Edward asked. Lord Melbury gestured to the documents on the table. "These appear authentic, though obtained through questionable means, but there is one irrefutable proof." He turned to Clara. "The Linwood family ring. Jonathan would have kept it, his last possession of value, sentimental rather than monetary. A silver band with a small sapphire and the family motto engraved inside, Veritas in adversis, truth in adversity." The words resonated through Clara's mind, triggering a cascade of memory. Her father placing a ring in her hand the night he died, whispering those very words, telling her to keep it hidden always, that someday it might protect her when he could not. "I have it," she whispered, the realization breaking over her like a wave. "In my writing case, beneath the false bottom where the portrait was kept, I always believed it was my mother's." "Not your mother's?" Lord Melbury confirmed. "The Linwood signet, passed down for generations. If you possess it, there can be no doubt. You are Lady Clara Linwood, daughter of Jonathan, Earl of Thornfield." The clock on the mantel chimed 3 times, marking the moment when Clara's past realigned itself with stunning clarity. She was both the governess she had lived as and the lady she had been born as, the two identities suddenly merging into a single, coherent whole. "I need to see the ring," she said quietly. Thomas was dispatched to retrieve the writing case from Clara's belongings, returning with a worn leather box that had travelled with her through numerous positions. With steady hands, Clara opened the concealed compartment where the portrait had been discovered, revealing a smaller hidden section beneath it. There lay a silver ring tarnished with age, its small sapphire glowing softly in the afternoon light. Clara lifted it carefully, turning it to read the inscription inside. "Veritas in adversis, truth in adversity," she translated aloud, meeting Edward's gaze across the room. "How appropriate." Lord Melbury nodded solemnly. "Jonathan would be proud to see you now, my dear. Not because you've married a duke. He cared little for titles in the end, but because you've survived, prospered through your own merits, and maintained the dignity he sacrificed everything to preserve." Clara slipped the ring onto her finger, not her wedding band, but her birthright. 2 circles of metal now marked her skin, each representing a different aspect of her identity, neither cancelling the other. "What happens now?" she asked, directing the question to both Edward and Lord Melbury. "That," Edward replied, "depends entirely on what you wish, Clara, or Lady Clara, if you prefer." She considered the choice before her, to embrace her newly discovered heritage or to continue as she had begun, the governess turned duchess whose story had already captivated London. "I am Clara," she decided finally. "Lady Clara Ellison Ashcombe, Duchess of Wexford. Both identities are mine, I'll claim them equally." Edward smiled, approval warming his features. "A wise choice, and perfectly timed," Thomas added. For if Lady Honoria publishes her revelations tomorrow, she'll find you've already embraced the truth she hoped would destroy you. We should announce it first, Edward suggested. This evening, at the Cunningham Ball. The entire ton will be present. Lord Melbury nodded approvingly. Strategic. I shall accompany you to confirm the connection publicly. Honoria Vale will find her thunder thoroughly stolen. As plans were made for the evening's dramatic appearance, Clara stood at the window, watching London's late afternoon shadows lengthen across Wexford House's garden. In 3 days, she had transformed from disgraced governess to duchess to rediscovered aristocrat. Yet beneath these shifting identities, she remained essentially herself, the woman who had walked in Regent's Park discussing poetry, who had faced Lady Honoria's barbs with quiet dignity, who had demanded honesty from the Duke she had married. Edward approached, standing beside her at the window. "Are you well?" he asked quietly. "I'm adjusting," she replied honestly. "It's rather a lot to absorb." "Indeed." His hand found hers, warm and steady. "Though you manage it with remarkable grace." Clara turned to face him, studying the man who had first deceived her, then defended her, and now stood beside her through this latest transformation. "I believe we're even now," she observed with gentle irony. "How so?" "You concealed your identity as Duke. I unwittingly concealed mine as an Earl's daughter. Neither of us is precisely who the other first believed." Edward's laugh held genuine amusement. "A matched pair of impostors, it seems." "Perhaps not impostors," Clara corrected. "Simply people who found each other beneath the labels society assigns." His fingers tightened around hers, the gesture more intimate than any words. "Does this mean you might consider forgiving my deception?" "I'm considering it," Clara admitted, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Though proper atonement may require considerable effort on your part." "I am entirely at your disposal, Your Grace," Edward replied, a smile warming his voice, "for however long it takes." The grandfather clock in the hall chimed the quarter hour, reminding them of the evening ahead. Another performance for London society, another transformation to navigate. Yet as Clara prepared to face the ton again, this time as the rediscovered Lady Clara, as well as the Duchess of Wexford, she felt a curious sense of completion, as though scattered pieces of her life were finally assembling into a coherent whole. Edward offered his arm with formal courtesy that barely concealed growing affection. "Shall we prepare to scandalize London society once more, my Lady Duchess?" Clara placed her hand on his sleeve, the Linwood signet ring gleaming beside her wedding band. "I believe we shall, Your Grace, I believe we shall." 6 months later, the morning room of Wexford House basked in spring sunshine, its windows open to admit the scent of new blossoms from the garden below. Clara sat at the writing desk, correspondence spread before her, invitations, charitable appeals, letters from tenants on the various Wexford estates. The season was in full swing, and the Duke and Duchess had become its undisputed centerpiece, their story evolving from scandal to romance in London's capricious estimation. The door opened softly as Edward entered, fresh from a morning ride. "More admirers demanding your attention?" he inquired, nodding toward the letters. "Supplicants, more accurately," Clara replied with a smile. "The Foundling Hospital seeks patronage, and Lady Melbury wishes us to lead the subscription for her new school for governesses." "How appropriate," Edward observed, moving to stand behind her chair. His hands came to rest lightly on her shoulders, a gesture of intimacy that had developed gradually over the months of their marriage. "You're uniquely qualified to understand both the students and their future charges." Clara leaned back slightly, allowing herself the pleasure of his touch. Their relationship had evolved through careful steps, from wariness to understanding, from understanding to friendship, and finally, in recent weeks, to something deeper and more profound. "Lady Honoria departs for the continent next week," she remarked, setting aside a particularly vicious note from that quarter. "Apparently London has grown tiresome." "London has grown unsympathetic to her particular brand of malice," Edward corrected. "Her revelation of your identity backfired rather spectacularly." Indeed it had. Their preemptive announcement at the Cunningham Ball, with Lord Melbury's authoritative confirmation, had transformed potential scandal into romantic legend. Far from damaging their standing, the discovery that the new Duchess of Wexford was actually Lady Clara Linwood, long-lost daughter of the Earl of Thornfield, had cemented their position as the season's most fascinating couple. "The Times called us fairy tale aristocracy yesterday," Clara noted with gentle irony, "though I suspect real fairy tales involve considerably less paperwork." She gestured to the stack of estate documents awaiting Edward's attention. He laughed, the sound no longer rare in their household. Perhaps we should commission a more accurate version, the Duke and Duchess who spent their days reviewing tenant requests and agricultural reports. Hardly the stuff of legend, Clara agreed, rising from the desk. She moved to the window, gazing out at the garden where crocuses and early daffodils created pools of colour against awakening green. Thomas visits tomorrow with news of the Devonshire cottage renovations. Ah yes, our ruined gentleman's retreat, Edward recalled with amusement, though considerably less humble than I initially described. The cottage in Devonshire, actually a comfortable manor house on a smaller Wexford property, had become their private project, a place where Duke and Duchess might occasionally escape their titles and responsibilities. Clara had overseen its renovation personally, creating a home that balanced comfort with simplicity. I've been thinking, Edward continued, joining her at the window, about the school for governesses Lady Melbury proposes. Oh? Clara turned to face him, intrigued by his thoughtful expression. The Thornfield estate lies vacant still, does it not? After your father's creditors were satisfied, the property itself remained in limbo, without clear ownership. Clara nodded. Lord Melbury mentioned as much. Without direct heirs to claim it, the estate fell to the Crown, though apparently no decision has been made regarding its disposal. What if we petitioned for its use as Lady Melbury's school? Edward suggested. The Thornfield name would be preserved, and the purpose would honour both your father's commitment to education and your own experience. The idea struck Clara with unexpected force. Thornfield, her ancestral home she barely remembered, transformed into a place of learning and opportunity for women like herself, a fitting resurrection for a legacy nearly lost to time and circumstance. Edward, that's perfect, she breathed. But could we secure it? The petition would require significant influence. The Duke and Duchess of Wexford, together with the Earl of Melbury, present a rather formidable alliance, Edward reminded her with a smile. And the romantic appeal of the daughter of Thornfield reclaiming her heritage for public good would sway even the most pragmatic Crown officials. Clara rose on tiptoe to kiss his cheek, a gesture still novel enough to bring colour to both their faces. Thank you for understanding why this matters. I understand you, he replied simply. As you have come to understand me. That understanding had developed slowly, through quiet conversations in this very room, through shared duties at the Wexford estates, through the gradual revelation of histories both had kept guarded. Clara had learned of Edward's difficult relationship with his father, his military service in India, his genuine discomfort with the privileges his title conferred. Edward had discovered Clara's passionate commitment to education, her quiet strength forged through years of self-reliance, her ability to navigate between worlds without losing her essential self. A knock at the door interrupted their moment of companionable silence. Simmons entered, bearing a silver salver with a single letter. From Lady Beatrice, Your Grace, he announced, presenting it to Clara. Her footman awaits a response. Clara broke the seal, reading quickly. Your aunt invites us to dine this evening. Apparently she has news that cannot wait until tomorrow's planned visit. Intriguing, Edward remarked. Aunt Beatrice rarely indulges in suspense. I shall write our acceptance immediately. Clara returned to the desk, penning a brief note that Simmons carried away with dignified efficiency. When they were alone again, Edward approached, taking her hand in his. Before we are swept into whatever drama Aunt Beatrice has orchestrated, there is a matter I wish to discuss. The serious note in his voice caught Clara's attention. Is something wrong? On the contrary. His thumb traced the outline of the Linwood signet ring she still wore alongside her wedding band. I've been reflecting on our unusual beginning, the deceptions, revelations, and transformations that brought us together. Clara nodded, wondering where his thoughts led. When I proposed to you at Mrs. Finch's boarding house, I offered marriage as mutual protection against society's cruelties, Edward continued. A practical arrangement born of necessity and, I admitted then, genuine regard. I remember, Clara said softly. What I did not admit, could not admit then, was the deeper truth. His gaze met hers directly. That in our conversations in Regent's Park, in your quiet dignity despite injustice, I had discovered something I never expected to find. A woman whose mind and spirit called to mine across all barriers of circumstance and position. Clara's breath caught. Though their relationship had deepened over recent months, neither had spoken openly of love, as though the word itself might shatter the careful trust they had built. I deceived you about my title, Edward acknowledged, his voice low and earnest. But I never deceived you about my feelings, though I expressed them inadequately. I admired you then. I love you now. Not the governess or the earl's daughter or the duchess, but the woman who has been constant through every transformation. The simple declaration, delivered without artifice or elaborate language, touched Clara more deeply than any formal poetry might have done. For a man raised to conceal emotion beneath aristocratic reserve, such direct expression represented a transformation as profound as any she had experienced. "Edward," she began, then found herself without adequate words. He smiled slightly. "You need not respond in kind. I know trust builds slowly after betrayal. I merely wished you to know the truth of my heart, whatever you choose to do with that knowledge." Clara considered the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment, from their first meeting in Regent's Park to the marketplace confrontation, from hasty marriage to reluctant partnership, from discovered deceptions to hard-won understanding. Each step had revealed more of the man before her, stripping away titles and pretense until only essential truth remained. "The first time you touched my hand," she said finally, "as we walked from Thornfield Market, I felt something I couldn't name, a recognition, perhaps, of something familiar in a stranger. I told myself it was gratitude for your intervention, or admiration for your courage in defending a disgraced governess." Edward waited, patient and attentive, as she found her way through memory to present truth. "Later, when I discovered your deception, that feeling seemed a fool's delusion," Clara continued. "Yet it persisted through anger and disappointment, growing stronger as I came to know the man beneath both masks, the ruined gentleman and the reluctant duke." She stepped closer, placing her free hand against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palm. "I love that man, Edward. Not for what he possesses or what title he bears, but for who he has revealed himself to be, in kindness and integrity, in faults acknowledged and amends made, in the courage to speak truth even when it risks rejection." His arms encircled her with gentle certainty, drawing her close. "Clara," he whispered, her name a benediction on his lips. "We began in deception," she murmured, "but we need not continue in it, not with each other." Their kiss, when it came, held the warmth of spring after winter's long absence, tender yet profound, a promise of seasons yet to unfold between them. Not the first kiss of their marriage, but the first untainted by reservation or doubt, the first fully claimed by hearts as well as lips. When they parted, Edward's smile held wonder tinged with mischief. What will society make of this development, I wonder? A duke and duchess who married first and fell in love after. "Society may think what it wishes," Clara replied, her own smile echoing his. "We've given them quite enough entertainment already." The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating two figures standing close together in the morning room of Wexford House. No longer strangers navigating unfamiliar terrain, but partners finding their way to shared purpose and mutual joy. Later, as their carriage carried them toward Lady Beatrice's dinner party, Clara gazed out at the London streets where her journey had begun, first as a governess, seeking modest employment, then as a duchess, navigating treacherous social waters. The city had rejected her, then reluctantly accepted her, and finally embraced the romantic legend she and Edward had inadvertently created. Edward's hand found hers in the carriage's privacy. "What are you thinking?" "About endings and beginnings," Clara replied honestly, "and how difficult it is sometimes to distinguish between them." "Philosophical as always," he noted with affection. "Practical, rather," she corrected. "Tomorrow I begin interviews for teachers at the Thornfield School for Governesses. Today I received confirmation that the royal petition has been approved. The estate will be transferred to the school's trust next month." Edward's expression warmed with pride. "You've accomplished in 6 months what most could not achieve in years." "We have accomplished it," Clara amended. "Your influence opened doors. Lady Beatrice's connections secured patronage. Lord Melbury's testimony convinced the Crown Commissioners." "Your vision drives it all," Edward insisted. "The governess who became a duchess, using both perspectives to create something new." The carriage slowed as they approached Lady Beatrice's elegant townhouse. Footmen appeared to assist their descent, bowing deeply as Edward handed Clara down the carriage steps. "Your Graces," Lady Beatrice's butler greeted them at the door. "Her ladyship awaits you in the drawing-room." They found Lady Beatrice entertaining not only Thomas Hale, whose presence they had expected, but also the Dowager Countess of Melbury, whose approval at the Harrington musical evening had begun their social acceptance, and Lord Melbury himself, resplendent in evening dress despite his advanced years. "Ah, the guests of honour arrive," Lady Beatrice exclaimed, rising to embrace Clara with unexpected warmth. "My dear, you look positively radiant. Marriage agrees with you at last, I see. The knowing glint in her eye suggested Lady Beatrice had observed the shift in their relationship long before either had acknowledged it openly. Clara felt colour rise in her cheeks, but did not contradict her astute aunt by marriage. "You summoned us with promises of important news," Edward reminded his aunt after greetings had been exchanged. "Has war been declared, or merely a new fashion decreed from Paris?" "Neither, impertinent boy," Lady Beatrice replied with affection, "though what I have to share may prove equally revolutionary in certain circles." She gestured for them to be seated. "Lord Melbury has received word from his contacts at the College of Arms." Clara glanced at the elderly peer, whose expression combined satisfaction with barely suppressed excitement. "What word?" she asked. "Regarding the Thornfield title," Lord Melbury explained. "While the estates were sold to satisfy creditors, the earldom itself merely fell dormant upon your father's death, without recognized male heir. As most titles do when the male line ends," Edward noted. "Indeed," Lord Melbury continued. "However, research conducted for the school project revealed an unusual clause in the original letters patent that created the Thornfield earldom in 1672. Unlike most peerages, Thornfield was granted with remainder to heirs of the body lawfully begotten, without specifying male heirs exclusively. A profound silence fell as the implications of this revelation dawned on those present. "Are you suggesting," Clara began carefully, "that the Thornfield title did not become extinct upon my father's death?" "I am stating with certainty," Lord Melbury replied, "that as Jonathan Linwood's only legitimate child, you are rightfully the Countess of Thornfield in your own right." Clara stared at him, momentarily speechless. After months of adjusting to her identity as Lady Clara, after finally growing comfortable as Duchess of Wexford, this new revelation threatened to upend her sense of self once more. "But this is extraordinary," Thomas exclaimed into the silence. "A Countess Suaujure in her own right is exceptionally rare. 5 currently exist," the Dowager Countess of Melbury supplied with precision. "You would be the 6th, my dear." Edward's hand found Clara's, squeezing gently in silent support. "What does this mean practically?" he asked, addressing the question Clara herself was too overwhelmed to voice. "It means," Lady Beatrice explained with evident satisfaction, "that our Clara is not merely the Duchess of Wexford by marriage, but the Countess of Thornfield by birth and right, a peeress twice over from different directions. The College of Arms has verified the letters patent," Lord Melbury added. "The formal recognition requires only your petition, which I have taken the liberty of preparing." He withdrew a document from his inner pocket, placing it on the table before Clara. "The title cannot restore the estates, of course, but it acknowledges your rightful heritage in the peerage." Clara gazed at the document, emotions swirling too rapidly to name. From governess to duchess to countess in her own right, each identity revealing new facets of a life she had thought simple and straightforward mere months ago. "You needn't decide immediately," Edward assured her, his voice gentle. "But you must decide eventually," the Dowager Countess interjected with characteristic directness. "The title is yours by right of blood. Whether you claim it or allow it to remain dormant affects not only yourself, but future generations." Future generations. The phrase caught Clara's attention, conjuring images of children yet unborn, children who might someday inherit both Wexford from their father and Thornfield from their mother, united in bloodlines that had found each other against all probability. "I will sign the petition," Clara decided, her voice quiet but firm, "not for the honor it confers, but for the truth it represents. My father concealed our identity to protect me. I will reclaim it to honor him." As Lord Melbury guided her through the formal document signing, Clara felt Edward's steady presence beside her, not directing or influencing, but supporting whatever choice she made. Their partnership had evolved from convenient arrangement to genuine alliance, founded on mutual respect that had survived deception, revelation, and transformation. Later, as London's lights flickered against the evening sky, and their carriage carried them back to Wexford House, Edward drew Clara close against the spring chill. "Countess of Thornfield and Duchess of Wexford," he mused. "Quite a collection of titles for a woman who once claimed to be merely a governess." "I was never merely anything," Clara replied with newfound certainty. "Neither were you merely a ruined gentleman or merely a duke. We are composed of all our experiences, all our choices, all our truths revealed and concealed." Edward's smile was visible even in the carriage's dimness. "My philosophical Countess Duchess, what wisdom will you bring to our breakfast table tomorrow?" "Perhaps simply this," Clara answered, resting her head against his shoulder with the easy familiarity of genuine affection. That the journey matters more than the destination, and that sometimes the longest path between 2 points, governess to duchess, duke to husband, strangers to lovers, proves the most worthwhile in the end. As Wexford House appeared before them, windows glowing with welcome light, Clara reflected on the extraordinary circle her life had travelled, from aristocratic beginning through humble middle to unexpected restoration. Yet more precious than any title or position was the man beside her, whose own journey had matched hers in complexity and revelation. "Welcome home, Countess," Edward murmured as the carriage stopped before their door. "Welcome home, husband," Clara replied, the simple word holding more meaning than any formal title ever could. Hand in hand they ascended the steps of Wexford House, Duke and Duchess, Earl's daughter and nobleman's son, two souls who had found each other beneath the weight of societal expectations and historical accident. Their story, begun in deception and transformed through truth, would soon pass into London legend, the governess who married a man she believed ruined, until London discovered he was the Duke in disguise, and she, the Countess in her own right. Yet the legend would capture only the outward form, never the inner substance of two lives that had discovered, against all probability, the rarest treasure of all. Love built not on illusion, but on truth revealed in adversity. Veritas in adversis, just as the Linwood ring had promised all along. In a world that judges by appearance and status, true value lies in seeing beyond titles and circumstances to the essential character within. We are not defined by the labels society places upon us, but by the choices we make when faced with both adversity and privilege. The most profound connections form not when we present perfect facades, but when we reveal our authentic selves, flaws, vulnerabilities and strengths alike. Clara and Edward's journey reminds us that genuine love requires courage, the courage to be seen as we truly are, to forgive imperfection, and to choose trust even after betrayal. Perhaps most importantly, their story teaches us that our identities are not fixed points but evolving journeys. We contain multitudes, the person we were born as, the person circumstances shaped us to be, and the person we choose to become. When we embrace all facets of ourselves, neither hiding in shame nor clinging to pride, we discover the freedom to form relationships based on truth rather than expectation. In the end, the titles we bear matter less than the integrity with which we wear them, and the compassion we extend to others, navigating their own complex paths through life's unexpected transformations. Beloved readers, if this tale of hidden identities, unexpected love and triumphant truth has touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to my channel for more captivating historical romances that explore the depths of human connection beyond social constraints. Did you find yourself drawn to Clara's resilience or Edward's journey toward authenticity? Which moment in their transformation moved you most deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one and cherish the opportunity to connect with those who find meaning in these stories of love transcending circumstance. New chapters of passion, intrigue, and historical romance await you each week. Subscribe now so you never miss the next journey into hearts discovering love against all odds. Until next time, may you recognize the nobility within yourself, regardless of title or station.